Hey guys, tonight we begin with something colder than your ex's heart and wetter than a dog's nose in December. Winter in a Victorian London slum. We're not talking Denzian Christmas card London with rosy-cheeked carolers and twinkling snow. We're talking raw sewage, freezing fog, and tuberculosis as a personality trait. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. But first, let's ask ourselves, have you ever wondered what it was like to survive winter when your house was literally made of damp? When your heating system was huddled with strangers and prey, when your job options were freeze while working or freeze while unemployed, could you handle sleeping in a room with 15 other people, 2 dead rats, and a draft that could strip paint? Would you survive on watery soup, moldy bread, and the occasional potato that looked like it had already given up on life? And speaking of survival, how would you feel about bathing once a month in water that 17 other families had already used? Congratulations! You've just woken up in 1850s London, specifically in a crumbling tenement in the East End. Your blanket is someone else's coat, your pillow smells like despair, and winter has just begun. Let's start with where you live, which is generous terminology for the rotting wooden box you're currently occupying. Your tenement building isn't so much a home as it is a vertical slum, a structure that would make modern building inspectors weep into their clipboards. Built cheaply and quickly. During the Industrial Revolution's housing boom, these buildings were designed with one goal in mind: cram as many poor people as possible into the smallest space while charging them rent they can barely afford. Picture this. You're in a room that's roughly 10 feet x 12 feet. Sounds small but manageable, right? Wrong. Because you're not alone. This room houses anywhere from 8 to 15 people, depending on how desperate everyone is and how creative you can get with sleeping arrangements. There are families here, multiple families actually, all paying rent for their corner of the floor. Some nights there are so many bodies packed in that you can't actually lie down flat. You sleep sitting up, leaning against a wall, or curled into a ball like a sad human pretzel. The walls are damp. Not occasionally damp. Not, oh, it rained yesterday. Damp. Permanently, structurally, fundamentally damp. Water seeps through the bricks from the outside, condenses on the inside because nobody's heard of insulation, and creates this delightful coating of moisture that never ever dries. In winter, this moisture freezes into beautiful patterns of ice on the interior walls. It's like living inside a decorative frozen hellscape. You could scrape frost off the walls in the morning if you had the energy, which you don't because you're too busy trying not to freeze to death. The ceiling leaks, of course, it does. The roof is made of cheap tiles that shift and crack, and when it rains or snows, water drips through onto whoever's sleeping below. You've learned to position yourself carefully, mapping out the leak patterns like some kind of depressing indoor weather forecaster. Don't sleep there. That's where the ceiling drips directly onto your face around 3 a.m. It's the kind of local knowledge that doesn't help much but makes you feel slightly less powerless. Your floor, if you can call it that, is rotting wooden planks with gaps between them. You can see down into the room below, where another family is living in exactly the same conditions. Sometimes you can smell their cooking, which would be nice, except what you're actually smelling is boiled cabbage that died of sadness 3 days ago. The gaps also mean drafts, constant, relentless drafts that whistle up through the floorboards like tiny frozen ghosts, specifically targeting your ankles. There's one window, it's small, grimy, and covered in so much soot from cold smoke that it barely lets in light even at noon. Some of the glass panes are broken and stuffed with rags or newspaper to keep the wind out. This helps approximately not at all. The window also doesn't open properly anymore, which means ventilation is a fantasy, and the room smells like a combination of unwashed bodies, cold smoke, mildew, and despair. It's a smell, so thick you can taste it, and you do constantly because there's no escape. You share this room with people you barely know. There's the family in the corner by the door, a mother, father, and 4 children who cough in rotation like they're performing a respiratory symphony. There's the elderly woman who mutters to herself and hasn't moved from her spot in 3 days, and you're not entirely sure she's still alive, but nobody wants to check. There's the young couple who fight loudly at 2 a.m. about who spent their last pennies on gin. Spoiler, they both did. And there are the random lodgers, people who pay tuppence for the night just to sleep on the floor, their heads resting on their boots, because leaving your shoes unattended means waking up barefoot. Privacy doesn't exist. It's not that privacy is limited or that you have to be creative about finding it. It literally doesn't exist as a concept. You change clothes under a blanket. You have conversations everyone can hear. You cry quietly into your sleep because crying loudly would wake the baby, and that baby took 3 hours to fall asleep. Every personal moment is a public event. Every bodily function is communal knowledge. You've learned to develop a kind of polite blindness, staring at nothing while your roommate changes or uses the chamber pot, pretending you exist in separate dimensions, even though you're 3 feet apart. The furniture, such as it is, consists of broken crates used as chairs, a few straw mattresses that are mostly just straw, and memories of being mattresses, and maybe one actual bed frame that 3 families are sharing in shifts. Some people sleep during the day while others work, then switch. It's called hot bedding, which sounds cozy until you realize it means the bed is literally still warm from the previous person's body heat, and you're now lying exactly where they were lying, in their sweat, with their lysed fleas joining you for the night. It's like an Airbnb if Airbnb is specialized in disease transmission. The building itself is structurally questionable. These tenements were thrown up quickly using the cheapest materials possible, and they're already falling apart, even though some of them are only 20 years old. The stairs cack ominously. The upper floors sag in the middle. Sometimes you hear the entire building groan like it's considering just giving up and collapsing, which honestly sounds like it might be faster than slowly freezing to death. And here's the real kick in the frozen teeth. You're paying rent for this. A significant chunk of whatever meager wages you earn goes straight to the landlord who lives somewhere nice and warm and definitely doesn't have ice forming on his bedroom walls. The rent is due weekly, and if you're even a day late, you're out on the street. No warnings, no grace periods, just immediate eviction into the frozen London streets where your chances of survival drop from slim to non-existent. This is home. This is where you retreat to at the end of an exhausting day of manual labor in the freezing cold. This is your shelter, your refuge, your safe place. Except it's none of those things. It's just the place where you're legally allowed to not die outdoors. Welcome home. Try not to breathe in the mold, spores. You've just woken up. Yam. And your first thought isn't good morning, it's am I dead? Because the cold in a Victorian slum isn't just cold, it's the kind of cold that makes you question whether your toes are still attached to your body. There's no central heating, no thermostat walls with your roommate, no electric blanket. There's just you. 15 other people in the same room, and a tiny coal fire that went out sometime around 2 a.m. because nobody could afford to keep it burning all night. Your breath comes out in visible clouds, which would be poetic if it weren't so deeply depressing. You're essentially living in a refrigerator with other humans as the only insulation. And, speaking of those other humans, they're all doing the same thing you're doing, lying perfectly still under whatever covers they have, trying to work up the courage to move, because moving means exposing yourself to air, and the air in your room is approximately the same temperature as a meat locker. A meat locker that smells like sadness and hasn't been cleaned since the Napoleonic Wars. You've been sleeping in your clothes, all of them. Every piece of fabric you own is currently on your body in layers that would make an onion jealous. Your coat is your blanket. Your scarf is your pillowcase. You're wearing 2 shirts, a vest, and you've stuffed a newspaper into your boots for extra insulation. You look like a Victorian fashion disaster, but you're slightly warmer than you would be otherwise, which is the only metric that matters. The fact that you've been sleeping in the same outfit for 3 weeks straight is a problem for future you, and future you can deal with the itching and the rashes. Your hair, if you're a woman, is still pinned up from yesterday because taking it down would mean exposing your neck to the cold. And you've learned that your neck is a surprisingly important heat retention zone. If you're a man with a beard, congratulations. There's probably frost in it, actual frost. Your facial hair has become a tiny ice sculpture overnight, and you'll need to thaw it out before you can move your jaw properly. The window, that single grimy window, has ice on the inside, not just a little frost around the edges, full sheets of ice, creating beautiful, crystalline patterns that would be Instagram-worthy if Instagram existed. And if you weren't currently contemplating whether losing your fingers to frostbite might actually be less uncomfortable than getting out of bed. You can see your breath hitting the air and immediately forming tiny ice crystals. It's like living inside a snow globe. If snow globes were designed by someone who hated happiness, the first person to move is always the bravest or the most desperate. Usually it's whoever needs to use the chamber pot most urgently, because bladder pressure eventually overrides the survival instinct to stay motionless under covers. This morning, it's the father from the corner family, and you watch him through half-closed eyes as he sits up, immediately starts shaking, wraps his thin blanket around his shoulders like a cape, and shuffles toward the door. His breath comes out in rapid puffs like a steam engine powered by misery. His movement creates a domino effect. The cold air that was being held at bay by his body heat now rushes into the space where he was lying, and his wife wakes up cursing. Then one of the children starts crying, a thin, hopeless sound that suggests they've been cold for so long they've forgotten what warm feels like. This wakes up the baby, who begins screaming, which wakes up everyone else who is still clinging to the last precious minutes of unconsciousness. Now everyone's awake and the room fills with the sounds of human misery. Coughing. Lots of coughing. The kind of deep, wet coughs that suggest lungs are auditioning for a tuberculosis diagnosis. Sniffling because everyone's nose is running from the cold. The creak of joints as people try to uncurl from the positions they've been frozen in all night. Someone's muttering prayers. Someone else is swearing. The baby is still screaming. It's a symphony of suffering. And it's only you. Check the weak gray light coming through the frozen window about 6 in the morning. You finally force yourself to move. It takes genuine courage, like jumping into a frozen lake, except the lake is your entire day. You sit up, and immediately every exposed inch of skin rebels against your life choices. Your hands are so cold they're gray, not pale gray. Your fingers are stiff, barely responding to your commands to curl into fists. You try wiggling your toes and feel something, probably toes, hopefully toes. You'll check later when you're braver. The fire in the hearth is indeed dead. Just a pile of grey ash with maybe 1 or 2 coals that might be convinced to return to life if you have coal to add and the energy to coax it. Coal costs money, money you might not have today. So, the fire stays dead, and so might you if this winter keeps up. Some families make a decision, heat or food. You can't afford both. Today, like most days, food wins. Which means you'll spend the entire day cold, but at least you'll have something in your stomach. Maybe if you can earn enough. Standing up is an event. Your muscles have gone rigid overnight. Your joints have locked in place. And your back feels like someone spent the night using it as a xylophone. You're 28 years old, which in Victorian slum years is basically elderly. You shuffle toward the door, your movements slow and careful, because rushing would require energy you don't have and warmth that doesn't exist. Other people are moving now too. A slow collective unfurling of frozen humanity. Someone's trying to light a match with shaking hands, attempting to get even a tiny fire going for warmth or to heat water for tea. The matches keep going out because their hands are trembling, too much to shield the flame. Someone else is unwrapping a child from their cocoon of rags, checking to make sure all their fingers and toes are still pink, still there, still functional. The elderly woman in the corner still hasn't moved. Nobody's checking on her yet. It's too early. Maybe she's sleeping deeply. Maybe she's dead. You've learned not to find out right away because starting your day with a corpse is bad for morale, and morale is already at rock bottom. You've been awake for maybe 10 minutes and you're already exhausted. The cold isn't just uncomfortable, it's draining. It pulls energy from your body, saps your will to live, makes every movement feel like you're winging through frozen trial and the day hasn't even started yet. This is every morning, every single one. Welcome to winter in a Victorian slum where even waking up is an achievement worth celebrating. Now that you're awake and moderately certain you haven't frozen to death, it's time to get dressed. Except getting dressed is a generous way to describe wrapping yourself in every piece of fabric you own, which amounts to approximately 1.5 outfits. Your wardrobe consists of a threadbare shirt, a pair of trousers, or a skirt that's been patched so many times it looks like a quilt made by someone who hated quilts. And maybe, if you're lucky, a coat that once belonged to someone who's now dead. Let's start with your undergarments, which is a polite way of saying the layer closest to your skin that you haven't washed in 3 months. If you're a woman, you're wearing a chemise made of rough linen that was white approximately never. It's grey now, stained with sweat, dirt, and various bodily fluids we won't discuss before breakfast. The fabric is so worn thin in places that it's basically transparent, which doesn't matter because nobody's seeing it and you're wearing 17 other layers on top anyway. This chemise is your best friend and your worst enemy. It's supposed to protect your skin from the scratchy outer clothes, but it's also harboring an entire ecosystem of lice that have set up a thriving civilization in the seams. If you're a man, you've got a similarly disgusting undershirt situation happening. Yours might be made of flannel if you're spectacularly lucky, but more likely, it's thin cotton that's been darned and redarned until it's more darn than original fabric. The armpits have holes, the collar is frayed. There are mysterious stains that tell the story of the last 6 months of your life, and it's not a happy story. Over this goes your outer shirt or bodice. For men, this means a work shirt that's seen better decades. The buttons are mismatched because you've replaced them with whatever you could find, bits of wood, old coins, even tied knots of string. The cuffs are shredded because you've been doing manual labor in the same shirt for 2 years straight. For women, your bodice or dress is a similarly tragic affair. The fabric, probably wool or rough cotton, has been worn so much that it's gone shiny in places, like it's given up and developed a protective glaze of despair. Now for the trousers or skirt, and here's where the patchwork really shines. Your trousers, if you're a man, started life as one color but are now a mosaic of different fabrics sewn on wherever holes appeared. You've got brown corduroy patching blue wool, patching gray cotton. It looks like a fabric store exploded on your legs. The seat of the trousers is reinforced with extra layers because you've worn through the original material from sitting on cold stone steps and wooden crates. The knees are similarly patched, creating lumpy bulges that make walking a textured experience. Women's skirts are even more complicated. You're wearing at least 2, probably 3 skirts layered on top of each other for warmth and modesty. The bottom skirt is so caked with street mud that it's basically a solid object, a protective shell of dried filth that actually provides surprising insulation. The fabric drags on the ground, soaking up every puddle, every bit of horse dung, every mystery liquid the streets have to offer. By the end of the day, the hem will weigh an extra 5 lb just from accumulated grime. Fashion. Magazines of the era show elegant Victorian ladies with pristine skirts. You're not in those magazines, you're skirt looks like it lost a fight with a chimney and then rolled through a stable. Stockings or socks are crucial, but problematic. You've darned yours so many times that they're more darning than original sock. The heels have been reinforced with layers of mismatched wool, creating lumpy protrusions that don't quite fit in your boots anymore. But you wear them anyway because the alternative is direct contact between your feet and your boots, and that's a recipe for blisters that will get infected and possibly kill you. Victorian medical care being what it is, even a blister is a legitimate health concern. Now, the coat, assuming you have one, this is your most valuable possession, worth more than everything else you own combined. It's probably made of wool, possibly taken from a second-hand stall or inherited from a dead relative. The original owner might have been your father, your uncle, or a stranger whose coat the parish distributed after he froze to death in it. This coat has seen things. The elbows are worn through, patched with leather or canvas or whatever was available. The pockets have holes in them which you discovered after losing your last 2 pennies through a gap in the lining. The collar is so dirty it's become structural, standing up on its own through the power of accumulated grime. But the coat is lined, and that lining, however tattered, is what might keep you alive today. You button it up carefully, avoiding the 2 buttons that are hanging by threads and the 3 buttonholes that have torn through completely. Some people safety pin their coats closed. You've tied yours shut with string. It's not elegant, but elegance is for people who aren't trying to avoid hypothermia. Accessories are minimal but crucial. A scarf, if you have one, gets wrapped around your neck and mouth to protect against the toxic fog and to keep your face from freezing. This scarf was probably originally a different garment, a shawl, a piece of a blanket, a strip torn from a dress. It's scratchy, it smells like coal smoke and desperation, but it's yours and it helps. Gloves are a fantasy. Only the wealthy have actual gloves. You've wrapped your hands in rags that you tie with string, creating mittens that are more concept than protection. Your fingers are still exposed enough to work, which is necessary, but cold enough to hurt, which is inevitable. For your head, a cap or bonnet is essential. Men wear flat caps that have been crushed, stained, and reshaped so many times they've developed their own personality. Women wear bonnets that are supposed to be white, but are now the color of old newspapers with ribbons that have frayed into decorative strings. These head coverings do double duty, keeping your head warm and hiding your hair, which you haven't washed in weeks because hot water is expensive and cold water in winter is basically voluntary torture. Finally, boots. Oh, your poor boots. They're held together with hope, string, and patches of leather that don't match. The soles have holes which you've stuffed with cardboard or newspaper that immediately gets wet and freezes into uncomfortable ice packs under your feet. The laces are broken and retied so many times they're now more knots than lace. But they're boots, and boots mean you can walk to work without shredding your feet on the frozen cobblestones. So you're grateful for them even as they slowly destroy your toes with their combination of insufficient insulation and excessive dampness. You look in the cracked piece of mirror someone's propped against the wall and you barely recognize yourself. You're a walking textile disaster, a mobile rag heap, a human embodiment of poverty, but you're dressed, layered, and ready to face the frozen horror show that is a London winter day, at least until your coat falls apart, which it will probably soon. It's breakfast time, and by breakfast I mean the meal that makes you wish you'd stayed in bed to conserve energy. You shuffle over to the communal area where someone has hopefully managed to heat up something vaguely edible. Today's menu, a bowl of GR so thin you can see your reflection in it, contemplating all your life choices. The GRL is made from oats that have been stretched with water to feed as many people as possible, which means you're basically eating hot, slightly flavored sadness. The oats themselves are questionable quality. They're the cheapest available, often mixed with husks, bits of straw, and the occasional surprise ingredient like a weevil or a tiny pebble that will chip your already damaged teeth. The ratio of oats to water is approximately 1:50, creating a consistency that's more oat-flavored water than actual porridge. You could drink it like soup if you were optimistic, but optimism died somewhere around day 3 of this winter, so instead, you just stare at it with dead eyes and a spoon. There's no sugar. Sugar is for the wealthy, the comfortable, the people who have things like disposable income and hope for the future. There's no honey either, no jam, no butter. What you might have if someone had a spectacularly good week is a tiny pinch of salt, just enough to make you remember what flavor tastes like before crushing that memory with the realization that this is it. This is your meal. This is what you get to fuel a 12-hour workday in freezing temperatures. The pot the GRL was cooked in has seen better centuries. It's cast iron dented, with a thick layer of burnt residue on the bottom that nobody's managed to scrape off since the pot was new, which was probably during the reign of a different monarch. Every batch of GRL picks up a slight burnt flavor from this permanent char, giving your breakfast a subtle note of kitchen fire from 1823. It's like a fine wine if fine wines were terrible and made you sad. You eat standing up because there aren't enough chairs for everyone. And honestly, sitting down would require energy you're trying to conserve. The bowl is chipped ceramic, and you hold it carefully because dropping it would mean a losing your breakfast to the floor, which someone would immediately try to salvage because food is food, and B, having to replace the bowl, which costs money nobody has. So you cradle this bowl like it contains liquid gold, even though it actually contains liquid disappointment. The GRL is lukewarm by the time it reaches you because you're not first in line. First in line is reserved for whoever woke up earliest or fought hardest for position. You're somewhere in the middle of the pecking order, which means your gruel has had time to cool, form a thin skin on top, and generally settle into its final form as barely warm oat water. You break through the skin with your spoon, and it's exactly as appetizing as it sounds. Around you, others are eating in grim silence. There's no cheerful breakfast conversation, no discussion of plans for the day. No, did you sleep well? Pleasantries. Everyone's too cold, too hungry, and too aware that this meager meal is probably the only guaranteed food they'll have today. Some people are dunking pieces of stale bread into their GRL, trying to soften the rock-hard crusts enough to chew without breaking teeth. The bread is yesterday's, or possibly last week's, purchased for pennies from a shop that sells day-old goods to the desperate. Children eat first, which sounds compassionate until you realize it's pure survival strategy. Children need to grow, and dead children can't work, and working children contribute to the family economy. So, the kids get slightly larger portions, though larger is relative when everyone's starving. You watch a small girl, maybe 6 years old, lick her bowl completely clean, her tongue searching for every last molecule of oat residue. Her mother doesn't stop her. There's no dignity to preserve when preservation itself is the goal. Someone coughs into their GRL, a wet rattling cough that sends everyone else instinctively leaning away from the communal pot, but not too far away, because that would be rude, and also because you're all going to get whatever disease that person has anyway. You're living in such close quarters that illness spreads like gossip at a tea party if tea parties were held in frozen petri dishes. The tea, if you can call it that, is even more depressing than the GRL. It's been brewed from leaves that have been used 3 times already. The original owner of these leaves used them, then sold them to a dealer who dried them and sold them to someone else, who brewed them and sold them again. And now they've ended up in your pot, creating a liquid that's tea-flavored water at best and hot brown, sadness at worst. There's no milk. Milk's expensive and spoils quickly, and even if you could afford it, you're not sure you'd want to drink it given what you've heard about London dairies and their creative approaches to food, safety, but the tea is hot, and hot is precious. You wrap your hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into your frozen fingers. This might be the warmest you'll be all day. This brief moment holding a cup of fourth-hand tea in a freezing tenement room. You savor it not because the tea is good. It absolutely isn't, but because warmth is a luxury you can't afford to waste. Some people aren't eating at all. The elderly woman in the corner is still motionless. Someone finally checked and she's breathing just barely, but she's too weak to get up for breakfast. Someone will take her a bowl later, maybe if there's anything left. A teenage boy is skipping breakfast entirely, saving his portion for his younger siblings. He'll go to work on an empty stomach and try to last until evening on nothing but willpower and the vague hope that someone might give him something to eat, out of pity. You finish your GRL in about 30 seconds because there's not much to finish. You're still hungry. You'll be hungry all day. Hunger is your baseline state, the constant background, noise of your existence. This breakfast hasn't satisfied you. It's merely reminded your stomach that food theoretically exists in the world, just not in quantities that would actually help you. You set down your bowl and someone immediately grabs it to wash in cold water for the next person. There's no time for leisurely breakfasts. No lingering over coffee and newspapers. You've eaten such as it was, and now it's time to go find work, because if you don't earn money today, tomorrow there might not be any GRL at all. Your stomach gurgles in protest. Your body is already burning through the meager calories you just consumed, trying to keep you warm, keep you alive, keep you functional enough to survive another day. Breakfast is over. You're still starving. Welcome to every morning in a Victorian slum. Or even food is just a cruel reminder of what food could be if you weren't poor. Nature calls and you immediately wish it would hang up, 'cause the toilet situation in a Victorian slum makes a portiati at a summer festival look like a spa experience. Your building shares one outdoor privy with roughly 50 to 100 other people. Yes, you read that right. One toilet for everyone. It's located in the back courtyard, and the walk there is an adventure in itself, especially in winter when the path is covered in ice, refu, and things you pray are just mud. The privy itself is a small wooden structure that looks like it's one strong wind away from total collapse. The door hangs crooked on its hinges, which means it doesn't close properly, which means privacy is a theoretical concept that exists somewhere far away from here. There's a wooden bench with a hole cut in it, and beneath that hole is a cesspit that hasn't been emptied in weeks, possibly months. The smell hits you from 15 feet away. A physical wall of stench so powerful it makes your eyes water and your stomach lurch. It's the smell of human waste, mixed with lime, mixed with rotting refuse, mixed with despair, all fermenting together in a frozen pit of biological horror. You approach the privy with dread, trying to breathe through your mouth, which is a mistake, because now you can taste it. The air around the privy is thick with methane and misery. In summer, flies swarm it in biblical proportions. In winter, thankfully, the flies are dead, but you've traded them for ice. The wooden seat is frozen solid, which means sitting down involves direct contact between your body and a surface that's approximately the temperature of a glacier. It's like sitting on an ice throne, except instead of ruling the north, you were just trying not to fall through the hole into the nightmare pit below. The queue for the privy stretches back toward the building. Yes, there's a queue, because with 50 to 100 people sharing one toilet, you don't just wander over whenever nature calls. Nature calls, then waits, then calls again more urgently, then screams while you stand in line with your neighbors. All of you, doing the desperate shuffle of people who really need to go but can't. Some people are hopping from foot to foot. Others are bent over slightly, faces contorted in concentration. Children are crying. Adults are swearing under their breath. It's a daily ritual of communal suffering. The wait can be anywhere, from 5 minutes to half an hour, depending on how many people are ahead of you and whether anyone in front is dealing with digestive issues. And in a Victorian slum, where the diet consists mainly of questionable food and contaminated water, digestive issues are not the exception. They're the rule. So, you wait and you pray and you try not to think about what will happen if you don't make it in time. When it's finally your turn, you push open the crooked door and immediately regret every decision that led to this moment. The interior is dark because there's no window, just gaps in the wooden walls where the wind howls through. The floor is wet with substances you refuse to identify. The walls are covered in frost and other deposits that have frozen solid. Previous users have carved graffiti into the wood, messages ranging from romantic declarations to crude drawings to what appear to be territorial markings, as if anyone would want to claim ownership of this hellscape. The hole in the bench is crusted with ice and other materials that shouldn't freeze but somehow have. You look down into the pit below, which is a mistake. It's a churning mass of waste that's partially frozen, creating a landscape of peaks and valleys that would be fascinating if they weren't made of everyone's excrement. The pit is supposed to be emptied regularly by night soil men, workers who come in the dark hours to shovel out the waste and cart it away. But regularly is a loose term, and supposed to be is doing a lot of optimistic heavy lifting. The pit is dangerously full, close to overflowing, which means the pyramid of waste is getting taller, and the available clearance between your body and the top of the pile is getting smaller. You hike up your multiple layers of skirts or drop your patch trousers, which is a complex operation in the freezing cold. While trying not to touch anything, you hover over the hole because actually sitting on the frozen seat would be both painful and potentially dangerous. There are stories of people getting frostbite in places no one should get frostbite. The cold air rushing up from the pit below is enough to freeze parts of your anatomy that should never be frozen. It's like a reverse chimney blasting cold, fetid air directly at your most vulnerable areas. There's no toilet paper. Toilet paper is a luxury item that won't be mass-produced for another few decades. And even when it is, you won't be able to afford it. Instead, there are squares of newspaper if you're lucky, or leaves, rags, or nothing at all. Today there's newspaper, but it's frozen stiff and would basically function as sandpaper on your tender areas. Some people bring their own rags from home, reusing the same cloth, because everything is about resourcefulness when you're this poor. It's as grim as it sounds. The entire experience needs to be completed as quickly as possible, not just because of the cold, but because there's a line of increasingly desperate people outside. You can hear them through the gaps in the walls, coughing, shuffling, muttering prayers or curses. Someone bangs on the door shouting, "Hurry up!" Even though you've only been in here for 30 seconds, the pressure is immense, both literally and figuratively. When you're finished, there's no flush, no magical swoosh of water that carries everything away to some distant treatment plant. Your contribution simply drops into the pit below, adding to the frozen monument of human waste that's been building for weeks. You pull up your clothes, tie everything back, together with freezing fingers, and exit as quickly as possible, gasping for fresh air that isn't really fresh because you're still in the courtyard where the privy lives. The next person rushes past you without making eye contact, because acknowledging what just happened would require admitting that this is normal, that this is daily life, that human beings are living like this in the wealthiest city in the wealthiest empire in the world. You hurry back toward the building, trying to wash your hands in the communal water pump, which dispenses water so cold it feels like liquid nitrogen. There's no soap. There's never soap. You just rinse your hands in freezing water and hope that's enough to prevent cholera, typhoid, dysentery, or any of the other diseases that thrive in conditions like these. Your hands are now wet and frozen, and you've probably just exposed yourself to multiple pathogens. But at least you've completed your morning constitutional. You'll need to make this journey again later today, and tomorrow, and every day for the rest of your life, or until you manage to escape the slums, whichever comes first. As you walk back to the building, you glance back at the privy. The next person is already inside. The queue has gotten longer. A child is crying, hopping desperately from foot to foot. An old man looks resigned, like he's made peace with whatever happens next. This is sanitation in a Victorian slum. This is what it means to share a toilet with 100 people in winter. This is daily life repeated over and over. A small degradation that combines with 1,000 other small degradations to create an existence that grinds people down to nothing. Welcome to the bathroom break. Try not to think about it for the rest of the day. Step outside and you're immediately swallowed by fog, but this isn't some romantic, mysterious fog from a Gothic novel. This is pea soup fog, thick enough to cut with a knife and toxic enough to choke you. Victorian London's fog was legendary. a choking yellow-brown miasma created by millions of coal fires burning simultaneously, mixing with the natural Thames Valley mist to create an atmospheric horror show that would make modern air quality experts faint. You can't see more than 3 feet in front of your face. Sometimes you can't even see your own hand when you hold it out at arm's length. The fog doesn't just obscure vision, it actively blocks it, like someone's thrown a dirty yellow blanket over the entire city. People vanish into it mid-conversation. Buildings disappear. The street you were just walking on ceases to exist. You're suddenly alone in a suffocating cloud that tastes like coal, smells like sulfur, and feels like it's actively trying to murder your lungs. And it is. This fog isn't just water vapor. It's a chemical soup of coal smoke, sulfur dioxide, soot particles, and industrial pollutants, all suspended in the air at breathing height. Every breath you take is coating your lungs with a fine layer of toxic particles. It's like smoking several packs of cigarettes simultaneously, while also huffing the exhaust from a coal plant. Your throat burns, your eyes water constantly, tears cutting tracks through the soot that's already settled on your face. You're coughing within minutes, and you'll be coughing for days after the fog finally lifts. The fog has color, which fog shouldn't have. It's yellow-brown, sometimes greenish, occasionally black, depending on which way the wind is blowing and which factories are operating today. Locals call it pea soup or pea souperer, which would be quaint if it weren't deadly. The name comes from the thick split pea soup that was a staple of Victorian working-class diet. And yes, the fog has approximately the same consistency. You can feel it on your skin, a greasy coating that leaves residue on everything it touches. Your clothes will be filthy by the end of the day, covered in a layer of microscopic soot particles that no amount of washing will fully remove. Walking through this fog is disorienting. In a way that's hard to describe, you lose all sense of direction immediately. Street signs vanish, landmarks disappear. The sun, if it's even up yet, is completely blocked, leaving the city in a permanent twilight gloom. People have been known to get lost on streets they've walked every day for years. Some wander in circles for hours, others step off curbs they can't see and break ankles, or worse, stumble into the Thames and drown in the filthy water before anyone realizes they're missing. Sound behaves strangely in the fog. It's muffled and distorted, making everything feel like it's happening underwater or in a dream. You can hear footsteps approaching, but can't tell from which direction. Voices call out from nowhere, disembodied warnings shouted by link boys, children carrying torches or lanterns who guide pedestrians through the fog for pennies. "Mind the curb," they shout, crossing ahead. Their lights create weak halos in the murk, small circles of illumination that reveal nothing but more fog. Horses panic in this fog. They can't see either, and they're smart enough to know. That's dangerous. You can hear them whinnying and stamping, their handlers shouting commands that echo weirdly through the thick air. Carriages move at a crawl if they move at all. More than one horse and cart has ended up in the Thames because the driver couldn't see the waterfront until it was too late. The sound of hooves on cobblestones comes from everywhere and nowhere, a constant rhythmic cling that gets louder, then quieter, then louder again as vehicles pass by in the gloom. The fog makes everyone sick, not eventually, immediately. Within an hour of exposure, you're coughing up black phlegm. Your nose runs with grey mucus. Your eyes are red and streaming. People with existing respiratory conditions and in the slums, that's basically everyone, start wheezing and struggling to breathe. The very young and the very old are most at risk. During particularly bad fog events, which can last for days or even weeks in winter, the death rate spikes dramatically. Doctors' offices fill with patients choking on their own fluids. Morgues run out of space. The fog doesn't just make people uncomfortable, it actively kills them in measurable numbers. But you can't just stay inside. Staying inside means not working, and not working means not eating. So you wrap your scarf around your face like a makeshift respirator, which helps approximately not at all. And you venture out into the toxic cloud. You join the other shadowy figures shuffling through the streets. Everyone moving slowly with arms outstretched like zombies, feeling their way along walls and railings. Shopkeepers have set up strings between their doors and the street so customers can find them. Some businesses give up entirely and close when the fog gets too thick, hanging signs that read "close due to fog," as if the fog is a person who might take offense. Crime loves the fog. It's the criminal's best friend, a natural cloak of invisibility provided free by industrial pollution. Pickpockets work overtime, bumping into people in the murk and relieving them of their valuables before disappearing into the gloom. Muggers strike from nowhere, grab their victims, take everything and vanish before anyone can cry for help. Even if you shout, who's going to hear you? Who's going to find you in this? The police try to maintain order, but they're as blind as everyone else, blowing whistles that sound weak and pathetic in the muffled air. The smell is indescribable. It's coal smoke, yes, but also sulfur. Burning tar, industrial chemicals, the temps at low tide, horse, manure, human waste, rotting garbage, and something else underneath it all. Something acrid and metallic that coats your tongue and won't go away. You'll taste this fog for days after it clears. It seeps into your clothes, your hair, your skin. You'll smell like coal smoke even after washing, assuming you can afford to wash. The scent becomes part of you, a permanent marker of Victorian London poverty. People with money escape the fog. They leave London entirely, retreating to country estates where the air is clear and breathable. But you don't have that option. You're stuck here breathing this toxic soup day after day, winter after winter. Your lungs are slowly being destroyed, coated in tar and soot and chemicals. You're developing what doctors call bronchitis, but what everyone else calls London throat or fog fever. It's chronic, progressive, and eventually fatal. But that's a problem for future you. Present, you just needs to navigate 3 blocks to the docks without falling into the river or getting robbed. The fog finally starts to thin around midday if you're lucky. The weak winter sun manages to penetrate the cloud just enough to turn the yellow-brown murk into gray-brown MC. You can see maybe 6 feet now instead of 3. This counts as improvement. People emerge from their fog-induced isolation, relieved to see buildings and other humans again. But everyone's coughing, everyone's eyes are red, and everyone's clothes are filthy with soot. This is winter in Victorian London. This is daily life. The fog isn't an occasional weather event. It's a seasonal certainty, a toxic blanket that settles over the city and stays, killing people slowly while they try to work, eat, and survive. Welcome to breathing. Try not to do too much of it. The streets of Victorian London in winter are less winter, wonderland and more frozen nightmare gauntlet. Picture this, narrow, unpaved, lanes covered in a delightful mixture of ice, horse manure, human waste that's been tossed from windows, rotting garbage, and the occasional dead animal that nobody's bothered to remove yet. The smell alone could knock out a modern person, but you've developed what can only be described as survival-level nose, blindness. Let's start with the foundation of these streets, which is technically cobblestone, but practically a minefield of uneven surfaces, missing stones and gaps that are filled with frozen sewage. The cobbles are slick with ice, which wouldn't be so bad if that ice were clean water ice. But it's not. It's frozen filth ice, a slippery coating over the stones that's part water, part horse urine, part human waste, and part mystery liquids leaking from the buildings above. Walking on this requires the balance of a circus performer and the willingness to accept that falling means direct face contact with substances you'd rather not identify. The horse manure is everywhere. Victorian London runs on horsepower. Literally thousands upon thousands of horses pulling carriages, carts, omnibuses, and delivery wagons. Each horse produces approximately 15 to 35 lb of manure per day. Do the math on tens of thousands of horses, and you're looking at millions of pounds of dung covering the streets. In summer, this creates dust storms of dried manure, particles. In winter, it freezes into lumpy brown obstacle courses that crunch under your boots like the world's most disgusting snow. The crossing sweepers try to help. These are usually children or desperate adults who stake out busy intersections and sweep paths through the muck for pedestrians, hoping for a penny or two in exchange. You see them now, a small, Boy with a broom that's bigger than he is, frantically sweeping a narrow lane through the frozen waste so ladies can cross without ruining their skirts. Not that your skirt can get much worse. It's already a biological hazard, but the concept of crossing sweepers exists, and you appreciate their effort, even if you don't have a penny to give them. Dead. Animals are a regular feature of the urban landscape. Horses that collapse from overwork, exhaustion, or disease are sometimes left where they fall because moving a dead horse is expensive and difficult. They freeze solid in winter, becoming temporary street furniture that everyone has to navigate around. Turn left at the dead horse is a legitimate direction. Dogs, cats, rats, they all die in the streets and stay there until they're either eaten by other animals, removed by someone who needs the space, or just decay into the general street composition. You've learned to step over them without much thought. Death is commonplace here, just another part of the scenery. The garbage situation would make a modern sanitation worker weep. There's no organized trash collection, no weekly pickup, no system at all, really. People just toss their garbage out of windows into the street below, sometimes with a warning shout of Gardez-vous, the English corruption of the French Garde l'eau, or watch out for the water, but often without any warning at all. Vegetable, peelings, fish heads, broken crockery, rags, bones, ashes from fires, and unmentionable substances all rain down from above at unpredictable intervals. Walking near buildings means risking a garbage shower, so you try to stay toward the middle of the street, which has its own hazards, like carts and horses and other pedestrians all trying the same strategy. The gutters, those shallow trenches running along the sides of the streets, are supposed to carry away water and waste. In practice, they're open sewers, rivers of filth flowing sluggishly toward the Thames. In winter, they partially freeze, creating ice dams that cause the waste to back up and overflow onto the street proper. The result is topography of frozen waste. Pools that you have to navigate around, over, or through, depending on your route options and level of desperation. Some are shallow enough to step through, others are deep enough to swallow your boot if you're not careful. And retrieving a boot from a frozen sewage pool is an experience that will haunt you forever. Children are playing in these streets. Yes, playing. Because if you're a slum child, you don't have a backyard or a park or even a clean floor indoors. The street is your playground, your social space, your entire world. You see them now, a group of barefoot kids running between carts, playing some game that involves a stick and a hoop, and a lot of shouting. Their feet are blue with cold, but they don't seem to notice or care. They've built a small fort out of frozen horse manure, which would be adorable if it weren't so tragic. These children are literally playing in excrement because they have nowhere else to play. The traffic is chaotic and dangerous. There are no traffic lights, no stop signs, no rules of the road beyond try not to kill anyone. Carts barrel through, narrow lanes at reckless speeds, drivers shouting at pedestrians to move. Omnibuses, those large horse-drawn passenger carriages, sway through the streets, overloaded with people clinging to the outside because the inside is full. Delivery wagons block entire streets while drivers unload goods. Everyone's trying to get somewhere simultaneously, and the result is a perpetual traffic jam punctuated by shouting, cursing, and the occasional collision that sends barrels or crates or passengers tumbling into the frozen muck. Street vendors line the edges of the affairs, their carts and baskets adding to the congestion. They're selling everything. Hot chestnuts roasted over small braziers, meat pies that might be meat, eels both, jellied and fried, baked potatoes, apples that are more bruised than fruit, and mysterious items wrapped in newspaper that could be food or could be something else entirely. The vendors shout their wares in voices that have to compete with the general den of the street. Hot pies, tuppence, fresh eels, chestnuts, lovely chestnuts. The noise is constant, overwhelming, a wall of sound that makes thinking difficult and conversation impossible. You're trying to walk quickly because standing still means freezing. But walking quickly on these streets means taking your life into your hands. Every step is calculated. Is that patch of ground solid or liquid? Is that brown lump frozen manure or something worse? Is that car barreling toward you going to stop, or should you dive into a doorway? Your feet are already soaked through despite your newspaper-stuffed boots because the frozen filth has melted just enough from the friction of walking to seep through the holes in your soles. Your feet will be wet, cold, and probably infected by evening. The buildings lining the streets lean inward, creating canyon-like passages where the sun never reaches even in summer. In winter, these streets are permanent twilight zones, dim and gloomy, even at midday. Icicles hang from gutters and broken drain pipes, some of them 3 feet long, creating beautiful frozen spears that occasionally break loose and plummet down toward the street below. Signs hang from buildings at angles, creaking in the wind. Porn, broker symbols, pub signs, shop advertisements all coated in soot and ice. People are everywhere, a river of humanity flowing through the filth. The wealthy ride in carriages with closed doors insulated from the street. The middle class walk briskly with handkerchiefs pressed to their faces, but the poor like you just trudge through it all, heads down, shoulders hunched against the cold and the wind and the general awfulness of existence. Nobody makes eye contact. Everyone's just trying to get where they're going without dying, freezing, or falling face first into something unspeakable. A police constable stands on a corner looking miserable and cold in his uniform. He's supposed to be maintaining order, but order is a foreign concept on these streets. He settles for occasionally blowing his whistle at traffic and looking official, though everyone ignores him because what's he going to do? Arrest the entire city? You finally reach a main thoroughfare, which is somehow even worse than the narrow lanes. More traffic, more people, more noise, more filth. But at least the street is wider here, giving you more room to navigate. You press on, dodging carts and people and piles of frozen waste, heading toward wherever you need to be today, trying not to think about the fact that you'll have to walk back through all of this tonight. This is every street, every day, every journey. Victorian London streets are a frozen, filthy obstacle course that you have to navigate just to exist. Welcome to urban planning, Victorian style. You need money, which means you need work, which means you're about to join the daily crush of desperate people, all competing for the same handful of awful jobs. In Victorian London, unemployment is a death sentence in slow motion. So every morning, thousands of slum dwellers pour into the streets looking for any work at all. And I mean any crossing sweeper, sure. Match girl? Why not? Mudlark, which involves wading through freezing temps mud, looking for scraps to sell. Sign you up. The problem is simple mathematics. There are too many workers and not enough work. The Industrial Revolution has displaced thousands of rural laborers who flooded into London looking for factory jobs, only to discover that factories don't need that many workers, and they certainly don't need unskilled ones. Meanwhile, traditional trades are being mechanized, meaning skilled. Craftsmen are also competing for the same shrinking pool of employment. The result is a buyer market for labor, where employers can offer starvation wages and brutal conditions because they know 50 people are waiting to take your place if you complain. Your first stop is the docks, where casual laborers gather each morning hoping to be selected for a day's work. The selection process is called the call-on, and it's basically a human auction where dignity goes to die. You arrive before dawn, joining hundreds of other desperate men and women crowding around the dock gates. When the foreman appears, everyone surges forward, hands raised, shouting their qualifications or connections or just their names, hoping to be noticed. I'm strong. I've got experience. My brother works here. Please, sir, I've got children. The foreman points at faces randomly, selecting workers like he's choosing apples at a market. 30 men get work. 300 go home empty-handed. If you don't get picked at the docks, you try the markets. Covent Garden, Billingsgate, Smithfield. These massive food markets need porters to move goods. And while the pay is terrible and the work is back-breaking, it's still work. You join another crowd of hopefuls watching as market supervisors walk through, selecting the biggest, strongest-looking men. If you're small, thin, weaker-looking, or God forbid, female, your chances drop to nearly zero. The markets want human pack animals, and you've got to look the part. Women have even fewer options, and all of them are worse. Needlework is the respectable choice, which tells you something about how bad the other choices are. You can take in sewing, stitching shirts, or making matchboxes, or sewing uppers onto shoes. All-piece work paid by the item. The pay is microscopic, literally pennies for hours of eye-straining work in dim light that will destroy your vision by age 30. You'll work 16-hour days and still not earn enough to feed yourself. But it's respectable, which apparently matters when you're starving. Laundry work is another option, and by option, I mean fresh hell. Laundresses spend their days bent over tubs of scalding water, scrubbing other people's soiled linens with harsh lye soap that dissolves the skin off their hands. The work is done in steamy rooms that are boiling in summer and merely cold instead of freezing in winter. Your hands will be permanently red, cracked, and bleeding. Your back will be destroyed by age 40, but you'll earn slightly more than needlework. So, there's that. Street selling is always available because it requires no skills, no employer, and no initial investment beyond whatever you're selling. The streets are full of cost among users hawking everything imaginable. Flowers, matches, boot, laces, sheet music, ribbons, pins, used clothes, food, both fresh and questionable. The trick is finding something to sell. If you have a penny, you can buy matches wholesale and sell them for a tiny markup. If you have nothing, you can try gathering watercress from streams, picking flowers from public gardens before the police chase you off, or collecting dog dung to sell to tanners who use it in leather processing. Yes, that's a real job. Welcome to Victorian entrepreneurship. Some people turn to pure scavenging. The pure finders collect dog excrement. The bone grubbers search through garbage for bones to sell to fertilizer factories. The rag gatherers collect any scrap of fabric that can be sold to paper mills. The cigar enders pick up discarded cigar and cigarette butts, dry them out, and resell the tobacco. These jobs are exactly as grim as they sound, and they pay almost nothing, but they're still jobs, and that means survival for one more day. Then there are the moodarks, mostly children, who wade into the Thames at low tide, looking for anything valuable that's fallen into the river or been washed up. Coal that's fallen from barges, nails, rope, pieces of metal, old coins, literally anything that can be sold. The work involves standing in freezing sewage-contaminated water up to your knees or waist, bent over for hours, competing with other mudlarks for the same scraps. Children die doing this, either from hypothermia, drowning, when the tide comes in faster than expected, or from the various diseases you can contract from intimate contact with London's liquid waste system. But it's work, and desperate families send their children to do it. If you're truly desperate and have given up on maintaining any dignity whatsoever, there's always begging. London's streets are full of beggars, each one with their own strategy. Some pretend to be shipwrecked sailors or veterans of foreign wars. Others display real or fake disabilities to garner sympathy. Children are particularly effective beggars because they look pitiful, which is why some families deliberately keep their children looking as wretched as possible to maximize earnings. Professional beggars stake out prime locations, busy intersections, theater exits, church entrances, and defend their territory against competitors like its valuable real estate, which in the begging world it is. The competition for every job, no matter how terrible, is fierce. When a shop advertises for a delivery boy, 50 boys show up. When a factory needs a floor sweeper, 100 people apply. Employers know this and exploit it ruthlessly. They offer wages that aren't enough to live on, knowing workers will accept them anyway. They impose fines for minor infractions, docking pay for being late, for talking, for not working fast enough. They fire people on a whim because replacing them takes approximately 30 seconds. Some jobs are only available seasonally, which means you starve during the offs. Dock workers might get regular work in summer when shipping is busiest, but find nothing in winter. Agricultural workers flood into London after harvest, competing for urban jobs until spring. This creates a rhythm of boom and bust, feast and famine, where you might eat in summer, but slowly starve through winter, even while working. The truly unlucky end up in workshops that are essentially legalized slavery. Small manufacturers pack workers into airless rooms, paying them piecework rates so low that even working every waking hour barely generates survival income. The matchstick factories are notorious, employing young girls to dip matches in white phosphorus, a chemical that causes FSY jaw, a condition where your jawbone literally rots away while you're still alive. The pay is terrible. The work is dangerous, but jobs are jobs, and people are desperate. Children as young as 5 are expected to work: chimney sweeps, factory hands, street sellers, message runners. Childhood is a luxury that slum families can't afford. Every family member who can work must work, or the entire family starves. Old people work until they physically can't anymore, and then they either die or end up in the workhouse, which is basically the same thing but slower. By mid-M morning, you've been to the docks, not selected, the market's too crowded, and tried finding someone who needs an errand run. No luck. Your stomach is growling, your feet are frozen, and you still haven't earned a single penny. You're getting desperate, which means you're starting to consider options that yesterday you would have rejected. Maybe crime, maybe the workhouse, maybe just giving up and hoping someone takes pity on you. But giving up means death, and you're not quite ready for that yet. So you keep trying, keep walking, keep looking for any opportunity to earn a few pennies. This is every day. This is the daily grind of survival. Finding work isn't a one-time event. It's a constant, exhausting, demoralizing struggle that consumes your entire existence. Welcome to employment in Victorian London. May the odds be ever in your favor, because they certainly won't be. If you manage to get work at the docks, congratulations. You've just won the lottery of terrible jobs. London's docks in winter are a special kind of brutal, a place where men gather before dawn, hoping to be selected for a day's labor unloading ships. The foremen pick workers randomly, shouting names or just pointing at faces in the crowd, which means you might spend hours standing in the freezing cold only to go home empty-handed. But today, miracle of miracles, the foreman pointed at you. You've been selected. Your immediate feeling isn't joy. It's dread mixed with relief. Relief because you'll earn money today. Dread because you know exactly what the next 12 hours will entail. And it's going to destroy your body one crate at a time. The docks stretch along the Thames like industrial fever dream. Massive warehouses looming over wharfs where ships from across the empire are morrowed. These ships bring everything. Tea from India, sugar from the Caribbean, timber from Scandinavia, wool from Australia, spices from the East Indies. All of it needs to be unloaded. And that's where you come in. Your human machinery, a biological crane system, powered by desperation and paid in pennies. Your first task is unloading sacks of grain from a ship that's just arrived from America. Each sack weighs approximately 140 lb, and you're expected to carry them from the ship's hold-up steep gangplanks to the warehouse. The gangplanks are narrow, slippery with ice and spilled cargo, and have no railings. One wrong step and you're in the Thames. And if the fall doesn't kill you, the cold water will. And if that doesn't kill you, drowning, while weighed down by your clothes, certainly will. No one's learning to swim when you're born in a slum. You hoist the first sack onto your shoulders, and your knees immediately protest. Your back, already damaged from years of manual labor and poor nutrition, screams in objection. But you can't show weakness because the foreman is watching, and if you can't keep up, you'll be replaced by one of the hundreds of men still waiting at the gates. So you grit your teeth, adjust the weight, and start walking. The gang plank flexes under your weight and the weight of the grain. Other workers are coming down as you're going up, creating a dangerous two-way traffic system on a surface barely wide enough for one person. You press yourself against the rope railing, which is frozen stiff and provides exactly zero actual safety. Your boots slip on ice. You catch yourself. Keep moving. Behind you, someone's not so lucky. You hear a shout, a splash, chaos. You don't look back. You can't afford to. You just keep climbing. The cold at the docks is somehow worse than the cold in the streets. The wind whips off the Thames with nothing to stop it, slicing through your thin coat like it's tissue paper. Your hands gripping the rough burlap of the grain sack are already numb, and they'll stay numb for the entire day because you can't wear gloves. Gloves mean less grip. Less grip means dropped cargo. Dropped cargo means instant dismissal and possibly having to pay for the damages. You make trip after trip after trip up the gangplank into the warehouse, drop the sack on the growing pile, back down the gangplank into the hold for another sack. Each circuit takes about 5 minutes. You'll do this roughly 100 times today. Do the math on the physical toll. By the third hour, your shoulders are raw from the burlap rubbing against the same spots over and over. By the fifth hour, you've developed blisters on your hands that have popped and are now just open wounds, being irradiated by rough fabric. By the 8th hour, you're moving on autopilot, your brain shut down to avoid acknowledging what your body is experiencing. The ship's hold is a special kind of nightmare. It's dark, claustrophobic, and filled with cargo that's shifted during the voyage, creating unstable piles that could collapse at any moment. Men have been buried alive under avalanches of grain, sacks, or crushed by rolling barrels. The air is thick with dust. Grain dust. Spice dust, coal dust from the ship's engine that coats your lungs and makes every breath a wheezing struggle. You're already coughing, and you'll be coughing black phlegm for days after this shift ends. Lunchtime doesn't really exist. You get 15 minutes if you're lucky, just enough time to wolf down whatever food you brought, which in your case is a chunk of bread so hard you have to dip it in river water to soften it enough to chew. The water from the Thames is brown and tastes like industry, but it's wet and it's free, which are its only selling points. You sit on a crate with other workers, all of you too exhausted to talk, just chewing mechanically and staring into space with the hollow eyes of men who've accepted that this is what life is. The injuries pile up as the day wears on. Someone drops a crate on his foot and you hear bones crunch. He hobbles away, replaced immediately by a fresh worker who is waiting for exactly this opportunity. Someone else gets their hand caught between two crates being lowered by crane, and his scream echoes across the docks. 3 fingers crushed to pulp. He's done for the day, possibly done forever if infection sets in. A new worker steps up to take his place before the man has even left the wharf. The cargo isn't just grain. Throughout the day, you'll move to different ships, different holds, different substances, tea chests that are surprisingly heavy for their size, timber planks that give you splinters even through your calloused hands, barrels of mysterious liquids that slosh ominously, and occasionally leak caustic substances that burn your skin. Bales of wool that are easier to carry but itchy beyond belief. Sacks of coal that cover you in black dust until you look like a shadow person, a living silhouette of a human being. The worst is when they assign you to the ice ship. Some cargo needs to be kept cold during transport, so the holds are packed with ice harvested from Norway. Your job is to move this ice before it melts, which means handling blocks of frozen water with your bare hands in winter. Within minutes, your hands are stuck to the ice, the moisture freezing to your skin. You have to rip them free, leaving layers of skin behind on the blocks. Your hands are bleeding, frozen, and useless. But you keep going because stopping means no pay. The foremen show no mercy. They're under pressure from the shipping companies to unload quickly. Time is money, and the ships need to leave on the next tide. So they push you, screaming at workers to move faster, docking pay for anyone who takes too long or drops something. Faster. You're not here to sightsee, move or get replaced. The psychological pressure combines with the physical exhaustion to create a kind of hell that transcends mere discomfort. Accidents are frequent and often fatal. Crane loads swing unpredictably in the wind, crushing anyone in their path. Ships shift against their moorings, pinning workers between the hull and the wharf. Men slip on icy decks and plummet into holds, breaking backs and necks. The Thames claims several workers a year, Bodies that sink into the murky water and are never recovered. There's no safety equipment, no compensation for injuries, no insurance. You get hurt, you go home poor, you die, your family starves. Those are the options. By late afternoon, the winter sun is already setting. Not that you could see much sun through the fog anyway. They're bringing in lights now. Oil lamps that create dim circles of illumination barely adequate for the work. This is when the most dangerous accidents happen in the dark, with exhausted workers moving heavy cargo. You've been going for 10 hours straight. Your body has moved beyond pain into a kind of numb dissociation. You're not a person anymore. You're a cargo-moving machine that happens to be made of meat. Finally, mercifully, the foreman calls an end to the day. The ship is unloaded, or at least unloaded enough that they'll continue tomorrow. With a fresh crew, you stumble toward the pay station, a small window where a clerk is counting out wages. When it's your turn, he hands you coins that amount to about 1 shilling 6 pence for 12 hours of back-breaking labor that's probably shortened your lifespan by a week. You've earned roughly the equivalent of a modern-day $10. Is not enough to feed a family, is barely enough to feed yourself, but it's something, and something is better than the nothing you'd have without this work. Your hands are destroyed, bleeding, frozen, swollen. Your back feels like someone's driven railroad, spikes through your vertebrae. Your shoulders have raw patches where the burlap wore away skin. You're covered in dust, grime, and various substances you can't identify. You smell like the temps, which is to say you smell like death's armpit. But you earned money. You survived another day. You'll do it all again tomorrow if the foreman picks you. Welcome to dock work in Victorian London, where the pay is terrible, the hours are endless, and your body is a renewable resource that will be used up and discarded without a second thought. Maybe you've landed factory work instead, which sounds better than the docks until you actually step inside. Victorian factories are dark, dangerous, and colder than you'd think given all the machinery. The buildings are drafty, the windows are often broken, and the only heat comes from the machines themselves, which means you're either freezing or burning with no comfortable middle ground. Welcome to the textile mill, where the future of British manufacturing is being built on the broken bodies of people who won't live to see 40. The building is enormous, a multi-story brick warehouse that from the outside looks almost impressive. Inside, it's a circle of hell that Dante somehow missed. The main factory floor stretches the length of a football field packed wall-to-wall with power looms, spinning jennies and carding machines, all of them thundering away in a symphony of industrial noise that will make you permanently deaf if you work here long enough. The noise is the first thing that hits you, a physical assault on your eardrums. It's not just loud, it's omnipresent, a roaring mechanical scream that makes thinking impossible and conversation a distant memory. The looms clack and bang, the spinning machines whir and screech, the overhead drive, shafts groan and squeal as leather belts transfer power from the steam engine to the individual machines. Everyone communicates in gesture and lip reading because shouting is pointless. By the end of your first week, you'll have a constant ringing in your ears. By the end of your first year, you'll have permanent hearing damage. There's no such thing as industrial hearing protection. There's barely such a thing as industrial regulation. The air quality makes the London fog look like a mountain breeze. The factory atmosphere is thick with cotton fibers, wool dust, and particulates from the dyeing process. Every breath coats your lungs with tiny fibers that will eventually cause bison or brown lung, a chronic respiratory disease that makes breathing feel like inhaling through wet cloth. Workers cough constantly, hacking up grey phlegm that they spit onto the factory floor because there's nowhere else to put it. The floor is covered in ectoration, machine oil, and cotton waste, creating a slippery surface that's both disgusting and dangerous. Your job is operating a power loom, which sounds skilled until you realize it mainly involves standing in one spot for 14 hours, feeding thread and watching for breaks. The loom is a massive iron beast that towers over you, its shuttle flying back and forth at terrifying speed, weaving cotton into cloth that will become cheap clothing for people who will never think about where it came from. Your role is to keep the machine fed with thread, tie off broken threads with quick fingers, and try not to get caught in the moving parts, which are completely exposed because machine guards won't be legally required for another few decades. The machines don't stop ever. They run from dawn until, well, after dark, and you're expected to keep pace. The factory operates on strict time discipline enforced by overseers who prowl the floor with sticks, literally hitting workers who slow down or make mistakes. There's a massive clock on the wall, and it's your enemy, counting down the hours until your shift ends, while simultaneously ensuring you're paid for exactly the time worked, and not a second more. Being late results in fines. Taking too long in the privy results in fines. Talking, sitting, or showing any sign of being human also results in fines. The factory owners have perfected the art of paying workers as little as possible while extracting maximum labor. The temperature is completely unregulated. Near the steam engines and in the summer, the factory becomes an oven. Temperatures soaring above 90 degrees with humidity near 100% because the moisture is necessary to keep the cotton from breaking. Workers collapse from heat exhaustion regularly. In winter, though, the factory is paradoxically cold because the massive building is impossible to heat adequately. The steam engines warm their immediate area, but everywhere else is freezing. You'll be standing at your loom with numb fingers trying to tie delicate thread with hands that can barely feel, while simultaneously sweating from the exertion of keeping up with the machine's pace. The children are everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Victorian factories employ children as young as 5 or 6 because they're small enough to crawl under the running machines to retrieve dropped thread or clean out accumulated lint. It's called scavenging, and it's exactly as dangerous as it sounds. Children are crushed, mangled, and killed with depressing regularity when they miscalculate their timing or when an exhausted child simply falls asleep under a machine. The factory owners prefer children because they can pay them a fraction of adult wages and because their small hands are better for tying threads. These children work the same 14-hour days as adults, standing on their feet the entire time, their growth stunted and their bodies deformed by the repetitive motions and poor nutrition. The machinery is a constant threat, a collection of moving belts, exposed gears, and spinning shafts that would make modern safety inspectors have simultaneous heart attacks. There are no emergency stops, no safety interlocks, no guards over dangerous parts. The drive belts that transfer power from overhead shafts to individual machines are constantly moving. And if your hair, clothing, or hand gets caught, you're getting pulled in. There's no stopping the machine quickly enough to save you. Workers lose fingers, hands, arms, and scalps with horrifying frequency. The factory keeps running while someone screams and bleeds out. Their machine shut down just long enough to remove the body and hose off the blood. The ventilation is non-existent. The windows, those that aren't broken, are kept closed during winter to preserve what little heat exists, which means the air becomes thick, stale, and oxygen depleted. During summer they're opened, but this just lets in the soot and pollution from outside while doing nothing about the dust inside. You're breathing a toxic cocktail of cotton fibers, coal smoke, machine oil fumes, and chemical dyes. Your handkerchief, when you blow your nose, comes away black and gray. Your lungs are being destroyed with every shift, though you won't understand the full damage for years when the coughing becomes constant and blood starts appearing in your spit. The bathroom situation is predictably awful. There's one privy for 200 workers and you're allowed to use it once during your shift for no more than 5 minutes and only at designated times. If you have digestive issues, and given the diet and water quality, who doesn't? You're in trouble. Some workers resort to urinating in corners or into drains because leaving their machine at the wrong time means immediate dismissal. The factory floor has a permanent smell of sweat, machine oil, and bodily functions poorly concealed. The overseers are everywhere, watching for any sign of slacking. They're typically men promoted from the worker ranks, chosen specifically because they've demonstrated a willingness to abuse their former peers in exchange for slightly better pay and the authority to carry a stick. They dock wages for any infraction, working too slowly, breaking thread too often, talking, resting, appearing tired. Some are sexual predators who demand favors from female workers in exchange for not reporting infractions. Complaining about this gets you fired and blacklisted from every factory in London. Meal breaks are theoretical. You get 30 minutes, which sounds generous until you realize it's unpaid. You have to stay in the factory, and there's nowhere to sit except the filthy floor. You eat whatever food you brought, which is usually bread and maybe an onion if you're doing well, while covered in cotton dust and surrounded by the noise of machines that never stop. The food tastes like machine oil because everything tastes like machine oil after a few hours in the factory. You have to eat fast because the break ends precisely when the clock says it does, and being even 30 seconds late, getting back to your station means fines. The shifts are brutal. 14 to 16 hours is standard 6 days a week. Sundays theoretically off, but some factories run 7 days and just rotate which day workers get off. You arrive before dawn and leave long after dark, which means during winter you literally never see sunlight. You walk to work in the dark, spend all day in the dim factory interior lit by flickering gas lamps, and walk home in the dark. People develop rickets from vitamin D deficiency, their bones softening, because the sun is a stranger they've forgotten exists. The pay is marginally better than dock work, but still not enough to actually live on. You earn perhaps 10 shillings a week if you're an adult male, less if you're a woman doing identical work, even less if you're a child. The factory owners justify the low wages by claiming they're providing employment, as if working people to death is a charitable act. Meanwhile, these same owners live in country, estates and drive carriages made from the profits of your destroyed lungs and crushed fingers. Injuries are so common, they're barely remarked upon. Someone gets their arm ripped off by a belt drive. There's some screaming, they're carried out. A replacement worker steps up to the machine within the hour. The factory keeps the accident rate quiet because reporting would mean investigation, and investigation would reveal safety violations. Not that there are many safety laws to violate yet. Workers who are seriously injured are simply dismissed with no compensation. Lost your hand? That's unfortunate. Here's what you earned up until today. Good luck surviving with one hand in Victorian London. By the end of your shift, you're deaf from noise, covered in cotton dust that's embedded in your skin, coughing up grey phlegm, and so tired you can barely walk. Your feet are swollen from standing all day. Your back aches from leaning over the machine. Your fingers are bleeding from tying thread with inadequate lighting. You've earned maybe a shilling, which might buy food for today but won't cover rent, clothing, heat, or any of the other expenses of staying alive. You shuffle out with the other workers, a procession of grey ghosts covered in industrial residue, all coughing in unison like a tuberculosis choir. Tomorrow you'll do it again, and the day after that, and the day after that, until your body gives out, or the factory finds a younger, healthier worker to replace you. Welcome to factory work, where the industrial revolution is powered by human suffering and lubricated with the blood of workers who will never see the wealth they're creating. Perhaps you've decided to try street selling, joining the thousands of costermongers, flower girls, and random vendors who line London streets hawking whatever they can get their hands on. This means standing outside in the cold for 12 to 16 hours a day, shouting about your wares until your voice gives out and your feet go numb. You might be selling matches, flowers, food, or just random objects you've scavenged, and you're competing with hundreds of other desperate people doing exactly the same thing. Your capital for today's entrepreneurial venture is 3p, your entire remaining money after paying rent. With this fortune, you've purchased 2 bundles of watercress from the wholesale market at dawn. Wilted, slightly frozen greens that you'll try to sell for a penny per small bunch. If you sell everything, you'll make 6p. Subtract your initial 3p investment, and you've earned 3p profit for a full day's work. This is the mathematics of poverty, where even success means barely surviving. You've claimed your spot on a busy corner near a market, though claimed is generous. You're in constant territorial dispute with the other vendors who've been working this corner for years and view you as an intruder threatening their livelihood. The flower seller 2 feet to your left has already told you to move. The pie man across the street keeps glaring at you. The woman selling bootlaces has physically pushed you twice. Everyone's defending their tiny piece of commercial real estate because this spot, this specific corner might mean the difference between eating tonight or not. Your sales pitch needs to be loud, creative, and constant. Watercrest, fresh watercrest, a penny a bunch, lovely crest. You shout this over and over, your voice competing with dozens of other vendors, all shouting simultaneously. The pie man is yelling, hot pies, meat pies. The bootlace woman is crying, laces, strong laces, a penny. The flower girl is singing, violets, sweet violets. The noise is overwhelming, a marketplace symphony of desperation, where everyone's trying to be heard over everyone else. Your voice starts giving out around hour 3. Your throat is raw from shouting in the cold air, and you've developed a cough that makes projecting difficult. But you can't stop shouting because the moment you go quiet, potential customers assume you're out of merchandise or not really trying. Silence equals invisibility, and invisibility equals starvation. So you push through the pain, shouting with a voice that's becoming increasingly raspy and pathetic. The cold is relentless and specific in its cruelty. Your feet, planted on frozen cobblestones, lose feeling first. By mid-morning, you can't tell if you're still wearing boots or if your feet have simply become numb stumps at the end of your legs. You try stamping them to restore circulation, but this requires energy you don't have and draws attention from the policeman, who's watching the market for any signs of vagrancy or disorder. Standing still means freezing. Moving too much means looking suspicious. You found an awkward middle ground of subtle shifting that preserves neither warmth nor dignity. Your hands holding the watercrest bundles are exposed to the wind because gloves would prevent customers from seeing the merchandise. The crest itself is freezing solid, the leaves becoming brittle and starting to turn black at the edges. Nobody wants to buy obviously frozen greens, so you're periodically breathing on your stock to warm it up slightly, creating the illusion of freshness. This might be the saddest magic trick in London. Watch me transform frozen garbage into slightly less frozen garbage through the power of my warm breath and desperate optimism. Customers are rare and brutal in their negotiations. A housemaid stops to examine your CRE, picking through the bundles with obvious disdain. "This is half dead," she observes accurately. You launch into your pitch. "Fresh this morning, miss. Lovely and green, perfect for soup." She's not buying it literally. She offers a half-penny for a bunch that you're trying to sell for a penny. You counter offer 3 farings. She walks away. You've just lost a sale trying to maintain a profit margin measured in fractions of a penny. This is why poverty persists. You can't afford a discount because you're already operating on margins that don't cover survival. Other vendors are your competitors, but also your community. The flower girl, despite her earlier hostility, warns you when she sees the police constable heading your way. Street selling without a proper license is technically illegal, though enforcement is random and often used as an excuse for police to extract bribes. You don't have a license because licenses cost money you don't have. So when the constable approaches, you try to look both industrious and innocent, which is difficult when you're obviously selling unlicensed vegetables on a street corner. "Got your license then?" he asks, knowing perfectly well you don't. This is the opening move in a negotiation where he either arrests you, which means losing your merchandise and your investment, or you pay him to look the other way. You explain that you're just trying to feed your family, that you've got children, that you'll move along if he wants. He's heard this speech 1,000 times. He settles for taking a bunch of your watercrest as evidence, which is the robbery with a badge, leaving you with less stock to sell. You thank him for his mercy, because what else can you do? The competition isn't just other vendors, it's also the shops which sell similar goods from warm interiors with actual security and respectability. Customers naturally prefer buying from established businesses rather than street urchins with questionable merchandise. You're competing on price alone. Your crest is cheaper because your overhead is zero and your profit margin is imaginary. But cheap isn't Always enough when cheap also means standing in the cold interacting with the desperate poor. Children are everywhere in the street-selling economy, and they're often more successful than adults. A small girl selling flowers generates sympathy that you, an adult, cannot. People buy from her not because they want flowers, but because she looks so pitiful that refusing feels cruel. You watch her sell out her stock in 3 hours while you're still holding most of yours after 6. Child labor isn't just common, it's often more profitable, which creates its own horrible incentive structure. The weather is everyone's enemy, but also occasionally an opportunity. When it starts to snow lightly, you switch your pitch. Warm yourself with crest soup, fresh crest for your pot. It's creative, but pointless, because nobody's buying vegetables during a snowfall. People are hurrying to get indoors, heads down against the wind, ignoring the vendors entirely. The snow is sticking to your watercress, making it look even less appealing. You're losing your investment in real time to weather conditions you can't control. Meal breaks don't exist in street selling. You can't leave your spot because someone will immediately take it, and you can't afford to buy food anyway because that would consume your profit margin. You're hungry, standing in the cold, selling food to people who can afford to buy food, unable to eat any of it yourself. The irony is not lost on you. A bakery nearby is pumping out the smell of fresh bread. Torture by a lactery means reminding you that food exists, but not for you. By afternoon, you've sold exactly 3 bunches of watercress. You've earned 3 pints total, which exactly equals your initial investment, which means you've worked for 7 hours and earned nothing. 0. Your time and suffering have generated exactly 0 profit. But you can't quit now because quitting means accepting total loss. So you keep standing, keep shouting with a voice that's now barely above a whisper. Keep hoping that anyone will buy your increasingly pathetic frozen greens. The other vendors are having similar struggles. The pie man has sold maybe half his stock, and the pies he's holding are now cold and congealed. No longer hot pies, but tepid disappointments. The bootlace woman is wrapping her stock away, giving up for the day, defeated. The flower girl is crying, actual tears freezing on her cheeks because she's been here since dawn and hasn't sold enough to cover her wholesale costs. This is the reality of Victorian entrepreneurship. Everyone losing. Slowly, everyone suffering publicly, everyone pretending that tomorrow might be better, even though tomorrow is statistically likely to be exactly the same. As darkness falls, which happens absurdly early in London winters, you're forced to make a decision. You can stay out later, hoping for evening customers, or you can pack up what remains and try again tomorrow. Staying means more cold, more hunger, more hours standing on numb feet. Leaving means accepting today's losses. You compromise by desperately trying to unload your remaining CRE at reduced prices. 2p for 2 bunches practically free. A cook from a nearby tavern takes pity on you and buys your final 2 bundles for 3 fairings total. You count your earnings 5p total for the entire day. Subtract the 3 pints you invested and you've earned 2p for 12 hours of standing in the freezing cold shouting until your voice died. Competing with dozens of other vendors, negotiating with brutal customers, and paying off a corrupt policeman. You've earned the equivalent of about 30 modern cents, but it's something. It's not nothing. And in Victorian London, not nothing is the highest achievement most slum dwellers can hope for. You pack up your empty baskets and head home, already dreading tomorrow when you'll do this again, armed with today's 2p, and the hope that maybe possibly someone might want to buy whatever you're desperately trying to sell. Welcome to street selling, where the overhead is low, the profit margins are imaginary, and the only guarantee is hypothermia. It's midday and you're starving, which is basically your default state. If you're lucky enough to have earned a few pennies this morning, you might be able to buy something from a street vendor, hot eels, a meat pie of questionable origin, a baked potato from a cart, or maybe just a chunk of bread. The food is always cold by the time you eat it because winter is an equal opportunity misery spreader and everything outdoors reaches ambient temperature within minutes. You've got exactly twopence in your pocket, which means you have choices. Not good choices, but choices nonetheless. The meat pie cost a penny and promises to be filling. The baked potato is also a penny, but might have actual nutrients. There's a woman selling soup for a halfpenny, though soup is generous for what's basically hot water with vegetable. Rumors. You need to eat enough to keep working, but you also need to save enough to buy dinner later, assuming you earn more money this afternoon. This is the calculus of poverty. Every decision involves gambling with pennies you can't afford to lose. You approach the pie man, whose cart is emitting steam and smells that are either appetizing or warning signs depending on your level of hunger. "Meat pie," he shouts, though he's notably vague about which meat. The pies are small, roughly the size of your palm, with crusts that range from golden brown to suspiciously dark. You hand over your penny and receive a pie that's warm on the outside and lukewarm on the inside. It's filling a brown substance with the texture of paste and the flavor of meat adjacent. There's no plate, no napkin, no place to sit. You eat standing in the street trying to look inconspicuous because appearing to have food makes you a target for thieves, beggars, and the desperately hungry. The pie's crust is tough, requiring serious jaw work to break down. The filling is gravy heavy, which is good for making a small amount of meat stretch further, but bad for actually providing protein. You can identify some chunks that might be beef or might be horse or might be the family dog from 3 doors down that went missing last week. In Victorian London, the provenance of street meat is a question you don't ask if you want to keep eating. The flavor is aggressively seasoned, which is usually a sign that the meat isn't fresh and needs spices to cover the taste of decay. But you're in no position to be picky. This pie represents calories, and calories represent the ability to keep working, and working represents the possibility of surviving another day. You finish it in about 6 bites, your frozen hands struggling to hold the pastry without dropping it into the street filth. The pie settles into your stomach like a small greasy rock, not entirely comfortable, but providing warmth from the inside out. But you're still hungry. 1 penny pie is not a meal, it's a down payment on a meal. Your stomach is making it clear that more food would be appreciated, but you've only got a penny left, and you need to make it last. You either baked potato cart, where a woman is selling potatoes that have been roasting over coals all morning. For a penny you get 1 potato with a small scrape of butter, if you're lucky, or just salt if you're not. The potato is the safer choice nutritionally. It's actual food from an actual plant, not mystery meat from an unknown animal. You make the purchase and receive a potato that's been wrapped in newspaper to keep it warm. The newspaper is yesterday's, giving you something to read while you eat, though. The ink smears onto the potato skin, adding a subtle note of printing press to your lunch. You peel away the newspaper and hold the potato in your bare hands, using it as a hand warmer as much as food. The heat seeps into your frozen fingers, a small mercy in a day of endless cold. The potato skin is charred black in spots, and you eat it anyway because throwing away any edible part of food is wasteful when you're this poor. The inside is fluffy and steaming, salted but butterless because butter is a luxury item that costs extra. You eat slowly, trying to make the experience last, but also quickly because the potato is cooling rapidly, and cold potato is significantly less appealing than hot potato. Around you, others are having their own lunch experiences. A child is eating a halfpenny worth of bread, just a small chunk torn from a larger loaf, chewing methodically to make it last. An old man is drinking soup from a tin cup, his hands shaking so badly that he's losing half of it before it reaches his mouth. A woman is sharing an apple with 2 children, each of them getting approximately 3 bites of fruit that's more bruised than flesh. This is lunch in the slums. Inadequate portions of questionable food consumed in uncomfortable conditions while standing in the cold. The baked potato vendor also sells hot chestnuts, and the smell is driving you insane with desire. Chestnuts are cheap, filling, and actually taste good, a rare trifecta in Victorian street food. But they cost a halfpenny for a small bag, and you're out of money. You've spent your lunch budget, and now you're just standing near the cart inhaling the smell like some kind of desperate chestnut-scented aromatherapy. The vendor notices and shoos you away with a look that says, "Stop stealing my smells. You're not paying for those." Some workers don't eat lunch at all. They're saving their pennies for a larger meal at the end of the day, betting that they can make it through the afternoon on willpower and desperation. You see them everywhere, hollow-eyed, swaying slightly, moving slower than they did this morning because their bodies are running on fumes. Some will make it, others will collapse from hunger or exhaustion, or the combination of both, and they'll be carried to the side of the street like broken machinery until they either recover or don't. The street food economy is massive and completely unregulated. Nobody's inspecting these carts for food safety. Nobody's checking if the meat is actually from animals that died recently rather than a week ago. Nobody's enforcing standards for storage, preparation, or hygiene. The vendors themselves are often just as desperate as their customers, trying to earn a living by selling food that's barely fit for consumption. They're not evil. They're practical. Sell what you can get, cook it enough to kill most of the dangerous bacteria, price it low enough that the poor can afford it, and hope nobody dies too obviously from your product. The eel seller is doing brisk business, which is surprising given that eels are not traditionally appetizing, but they're cheap and plentiful from the Thames, and when you boil them and serve them in a cup with weak vinegar, they become gelled eels, a London delicacy that's beloved by working-class people who have convinced themselves it's food rather than punishment. You watch people slurping down grey, gelatinous chunks of eel, their faces showing the kind of determined grimace that says, "I am eating this because I must, not because I want to." Coffee stalls dot the corners, selling cups of what's technically coffee but practically roasted Korean acorns with maybe a memory of an actual coffee bean somewhere in its ancestry. It's hot, though, and hot is valuable. Workers clutch the cups with both hands, absorbing the warmth while drinking the bitter liquid that tastes like someone described coffee to someone who'd never had it. And they made their best guess. The cups are shared, passed from person to person, because buying your own cup is wasteful when communal drinking is free. Aside from the tuberculosis risk, for those with no money at all, there are charities. Churches sometimes set up soup kitchens, though the soup is predictably terrible, watery, unseasoned, and served with a side of religious lecture about how poverty is a moral failing that can be solved through prayer and better life choices. You have to sit through a sermon before receiving your bowl, which means trading your time and dignity for calories. Some people do it. Others would rather starve than endure the condescension. The workhouse offers meals, but entering the workhouse means giving up your freedom, your family, and any hope of a better future. The meals there are deliberately inadequate, designed to be just enough to prevent death, but not enough to make workhouse life appealing. The food is the same every day: watery porridge for breakfast, bread and cheese for lunch, more watery porridge for dinner. It's the culinary equivalent of giving up. You finish your potato, now completely cold, and lick your fingers to get every last bit of salt and potato residue. Your lunch has cost you tuppence and provided perhaps 400 calories, maybe a third of what you actually need for a day of manual labor in freezing temperatures. You're still hungry. You'll be hungry all afternoon. You'll be hungry when you go to sleep tonight. Hunger is the background noise of your existence, the constant companion that never leaves. Other workers are wrapping up their lunch breaks such as they were. The docker who bought a pie is already heading back to the wharfs. The factory girl who shared bread with her friend is returning to her loom. The street sweeper who had nothing at all is picking up his broom again, running on nothing but determination and the fear of what happens if he stops working. You check the weak winter sun, which is already starting its descent toward evening, even though it's barely past noon. The days are short, the nights are long, and you've got hours of work ahead of you before you can even think about dinner, which will probably be just as inadequate as lunch but eaten in the dark instead of the grey daylight. Your stomach gurgles in protest, a sound like distant thunder, reminding you that a penny pie and a baked potato are not a meal plan. They're a temporary ceasefire in the ongoing war between your body's needs and your wallet's reality. Welcome to lunch in Victorian London, where the food is questionable, the portions are tragic, and eating is less about nutrition and more about postponing starvation for a few more hours. Look around and you'll notice children everywhere, and they're not playing. Victorian slum children don't have the luxury of childhood as we understand it. By age 5 or 6, they're expected to contribute to the family survival, which means working. Little boys become chimney sweeps, squeezing into flue that adult men can fit through, breathing soot and occasionally getting stuck or burned. The chimney sweeps climbing boys are some of the most tragic figures in Victorian London. You see one now, a child who can't be older than 7, covered head to toe in black soot so thick you can barely see his skin. His master, an adult sweep, is pushing him toward a townhouse chimney, literally shoving the terrified child upward into the dark flue. The boy's job is to climb up the inside of the chimney, scraping soot loose with brushes in his bare hands, breathing the toxic black dust, while wedged in a space so narrow his shoulders scrape the sides. Some chimneys are still hot from morning fires. Others are architecturally complex, with turns and bends where children get stuck and suffocate, trapped in the dark until someone finally digs through the brickwork to retrieve their body. These climbing boys develop respiratory diseases that kill them by their teens. Their knees and elbows become calloused and deformed from crawling through tight spaces. They're frequently burned when they encounter hot flue or when their masters light fires below them to encourage faster climbing, which is a euphemism for torture. The boys are essentially enslaved, purchased from desperate parents or workhouses for a few pounds, then worked until they were either too big to fit in chimneys or too dead to work. Nobody's regulating this industry. Nobody's protecting these children. Their tools, human brushes, disposable, but chimney sweeping isn't the only child labor option. The factories love children because their small hands can reach into machinery that adults can't access, which means they're perfect for crawling under running looms to retrieve dropped thread or clean out mechanical components without shutting down production. You see them in the textile mills, dodging between moving parts with the casual fearlessness of children who don't yet understand that death is permanent. When a child gets caught in a belt or crushed by machinery, there's a brief commotion, some crying, and then a replacement child is brought in because there's always another desperate family willing to send their next youngest to the factory. The mines are even worse, though you don't see them here in London. In the coal mines up north, children as young as 5 work as trappers, sitting alone in the dark for 12-hour shifts, opening and closing ventilation doors as coal carts pass. Slightly older children become hurriers, crawling through mine tunnels, pulling coal carts on their hands and knees like human pack animals. The darkness, the isolation, the physical deformation from the work. It's childhood as a horror story. And it's completely legal, completely normal, completely accepted. Street work is the visible child labor you see everywhere. Children selling flowers, matches, newspapers, bootlaces, watercrests, anything portable and cheap. A girl of perhaps 8 is selling violets on the corner. Her fingers blue with cold, her dress so thin you can see her skeletal frame through the fabric. She's been standing there since dawn, and she'll be there until well after dark, hoping to sell enough penny bunches to avoid a beating from whoever's managing her. Some of these children work for their parents. Others work for criminal gangs who've adopted them and take most of their earnings. All of them are exposed to weather, disease, and predators, human and otherwise. The crossing sweepers are usually boys stationed at busy intersections with brooms, sweeping paths through the horse manure and filth so pedestrians can cross without ruining their shoes. They work for tips, hoping for a penny or even a halfpenny from grateful pedestrians. On good days, they might earn 6 pence. On bad days, nothing. They're out in all weather because staying home means no income, means family starvation. You see one now, a boy of maybe 9, sweeping frantically as a lady approaches, hoping she'll notice his effort and reward it. She doesn't. She steps over his cleaned path without acknowledgement, and the boy's face shows a disappointment so familiar it's clearly a daily experience. The mudlarks are working the Thames foreshore. Children wing through toxic sludge at low tide, looking for anything sellable. Coal, nails, rope, bones, copper, old coins, anything the river has deposited or that's fallen from ships. They're barefoot because boots would be ruined immediately, and also because barefoot means better grip on the slippery mud. The water is freezing, contaminated with sewage and industrial waste, and filled with sharp objects that cut their feet regularly. Infections are common. Drowning is a constant risk when the tide comes in faster than expected, but the mudlarks keep coming back because a good day might yield 3 pence worth of findings, and 3 pence can mean the difference between eating and not. Some children have jobs that are barely distinguishable from slavery. They're employed as domestic servants in middle-class homes, working from before dawn until after dark, sleeping in unheated attics or basement, fed on scraps and beaten for minor infractions. A scullery maid might be 11 years old, spending 14 hours a day scrubbing pots with caustic soap that destroys her hands, hauling water up multiple flights of stairs, and sleeping on a mat in the kitchen next to the stove because that's the only heat source she's allowed to use. If she complains, she's dismissed without reference, which means never working in service again. The match factories employ girls as young as 10 to dip wooden sticks into white phosphorus, creating the matches that light London's fires and lamps. The phosphorus causes FSY jaw, a condition where the jawbone starts to rot and glow in the dark. Literally, your face becomes luminescent as it dies. The condition is excruciating and eventually fatal, but the girls keep working because their families need the wages. The factory owners know about the danger, they just don't care. There are always more girls desperate enough to take the risk. Education is theoretically available, but practically impossible for slum children. There are ragged schools, charity institutions meant to provide basic literacy to the poor, but attending means not working. And not working means not eating. Families have to choose. An educated child who might have a better future, or a working child who helps the family survive today. Today always wins. Most slum children can't read or write. They'll never learn. They'll grow up illiterate, trapped in the same cycle of poverty that trapped their parents. The childhood mortality rate in the slums is staggering. Nearly half of all children born in these conditions don't survive to age 5. Disease, malnutrition, accidents, exposure, anything can kill a child whose immune system is compromised by constant hunger and whose environment is actively toxic. Parents have multiple children, not because they want large families, but because they expect to lose several and need backups to ensure some survive to adulthood. It's grim calculus, but it's practical in a world where children are fragile and death is common. You see a group of children huddled in a doorway, not working, not begging, just existing. They might be homeless, orphaned, or simply displaced from wherever they usually stay. They're sharing body heat, pressed together like puppies in a cold kennel. The oldest, maybe 12, has her arms around the smaller ones, trying to shield them from the wind. They're all wearing rags that barely qualify as clothing. None of them are wearing shoes. They look at you with hollow eyes that have seen too much and expect nothing good from adults because adults have given them nothing good thus far. Street children develop survival skills that would impress military strategists. They know which shops throw away bread at closing time. They know which alleys have shelter from the wind. They know which adults might give them work and which will just beat them for sport. They formed loose gangs for protection. Not organized crime syndicates, but just groups of children watching out for each other because nobody else will. They steal. Yes, because not stealing means dying. And between morality and mortality, survival wins every time. Some of these working children are supporting not just themselves, but their entire families. A 10-year-old boy might be the primary breadwinner because his father is dead, or drunk or disabled. A 12-year-old girl might be raising her younger siblings because her mother died in childbirth, and there's nobody else. These children have responsibilities that would crush most adults, and they carry them with a grim determination born of absolute necessity. The government knows about child labor. Reformers write passionate articles about it. Charles Dickens publishes novels featuring sympathetic child. characters in terrible conditions, but meaningful labor laws are still decades away. And even when they come, enforcement will be minimal. The Victorian attitude is that poor children need to work to build character, to learn discipline, to become productive members of society. The fact that most of them die young or grow up broken is just unfortunate collateral damage in the great engine of progress. You watch a small boy, maybe 6, carrying a bundle of sticks on his back that's nearly as large as he is. He's selling kindling, going door to door, hoping someone will buy enough to start a fire. His face is red with cold and effort. He's crying silently, tears, making tracks through the dirt on his cheeks. But he keeps walking because stopping means going home empty-handed, and empty-handed means punishment. This is childhood in Victorian London slums. Not playing, not learning, not growing, just surviving, working, and hoping to live long enough to become an adult who can then continue surviving, working, and hoping. The cycle is endless, brutal, and normalized. Welcome to being a child in 1850s London, where childhood is a luxury you can't afford, and working is your only option besides dying. Everyone around you is coughing, not the polite, hand-over-mouth cough of a modern office. This is the deep rattling "I might die" from this cough that echoes through the slums like a death knell. Tuberculosis, or consumption, as they called it, is everywhere in Victorian London slums. It spreads through cramped living conditions, poor nutrition, and the general filth that permeates everything. But TB isn't your only concern. Cholera is the big terror, the disease that can kill entire streets in a matter of days. It comes in waves, epidemics that sweep through London every few years, turning the slums into mass graves. The disease spreads through contaminated water, which would be useful information if anyone actually understood germ theory, yet, which they don't. The prevailing medical belief is that cholera spreads through miasma, bad air, which means the prescribed prevention is opening windows and avoiding smells. Helpful. Meanwhile, everyone's drinking water contaminated with their own sewage, and the disease spreads like wildfire through a population with zero understanding of how it actually works. When cholera hits, it hits hard. You go from healthy to dead in as little as 12 hours. The symptoms are horrific. Violent diarrhea that dehydrates you so rapidly your skin turns blue and your eyes sink into your skull. You look like a corpse before you actually become one. There's no treatment. Doctors try everything. Bleeding, purging, opium, prayer. But nothing works because they're treating symptoms while the disease ravages your body's fluid balance. You either survive through sheer luck and a strong constitution, or you die in agony while your family watches helplessly. Typhoid and typhus run rampant, spread by lice, fleas, and contaminated food. The symptoms include high fever, delirium, and a rash that makes you look like you've been spotted by some malevolent god. Treatment consists mainly of rest and hope, which is medical code for we have no idea what to do. Many people recover, many more don't. The randomness of who lives and who dies creates a kind of fatalistic attitude where illness is just another thing that happens, like weather beyond human control or understanding. Smallpox scars the faces of survivors, leaving them pockmarked and disfigured. The disease is particularly cruel to children, killing them in horrifying numbers. Vaccination exists. Edward Jenner pioneered it decades ago, but it's not widely available to the poor, costs money, and many people don't trust it because medical science has a credibility problem when their other treatments include leeches and mercury. So Smallpox continues its rampage through communities that could be protected but aren't. Respiratory diseases are everywhere in a city choked with coal smoke and fog. Bronchitis, pneumonia, pleurisy. Your lungs are under constant assault from the toxic air. Children develop chronic coughs before they can walk. Adults hack up black phlegm as a normal part of life. In winter, when the fog is thickest and the cold most brutal, respiratory deaths spike dramatically. The very act of breathing is slowly killing you. Particle by particle, breath by breath. Skin diseases are universal. Scabies, impetigo, ringworm, lice infestations. Everyone has something. The itching is constant, maddening, And there's no relief because treating skin conditions requires cleanliness, and cleanliness requires water, soap, and time, none of which you have. You scratch until you bleed, then the wounds get infected. Then you have a new problem layered on top of the original one. It's a dermatological nightmare from which there's no waking. Rickets affects children whose diet lacks vitamin D and calcium, causing their bones to soften and deform. You see them everywhere. Children with bowed legs, pigeon chests, and spines that curve unnaturally. They're growing up malformed because their bodies don't have the nutrients needed for proper bone development. There's no treatment. They'll carry these deformities for life. Physical evidence of childhood, poverty literally written into their skeletons. Dental problems affect everyone because nobody's brushing their teeth with anything effective. Toothaches are a constant companion, and they frequently develop into abscesses that can kill you if the infection spreads to your brain or bloodstream. The only treatment is extraction, performed without anesthesia by barber surgeons who pull teeth with the same tools they use for other procedures. By age 30, you're missing multiple teeth. By age 40, if you're still alive, you might not have any left. This is life in Victorian London slums, not if you'll get sick, but what will kill you first. You're thirsty, which presents a problem because the water in Victorian London is trying to kill you. The Thames, London's main water source, is essentially an open sewer by the 1850s. Raw sewage flows directly into the river, which then gets pumped back into homes and public fountains as drinking water. The system is a perfect closed loop of disease distribution, and nobody's figured out yet that maybe, just maybe, drinking your own sewage isn't a great public health strategy. The Thames looks exactly as appetizing as it sounds. It's brown, thick, and moves sluggishly like it's too tired from carrying London's waste to flow properly. On hot days, the smell is so overpowering that Parliament has to soak the curtains in chloride of lime just to continue functioning. They call it the Great Stink, which undersells the horror. The river is essentially liquid death, a biological weapon flowing through the heart of the city, and everyone's drinking from it. Water companies pump this sewage water into a distribution system that's barely functional. The pipes are old, leaky, and share space with sewage pipes, which means cross-contamination is not just possible, but inevitable. Water pressure is low and intermittent. It might flow for a few hours a day if you're lucky. People fill containers during these brief windows, storing water in barrels, buckets, or whatever vessels they have, which then sit uncovered in their rooms, collecting dust, insects, and whatever else falls into them. Public standpipes serve the slums, communal water sources where people line up with containers. The water that comes out is cloudy, brownish, and often contains visible particles that nobody wants to identify. But it's free, which makes it the only option for most people. You watch the queue, everyone waiting their turn, filling their buckets with liquid that looks like weak tea and probably tastes worse. Nobody's boiling this water before drinking it because fuel is expensive, and the connection between boiled water and reduced disease isn't yet established medical knowledge. Some enterprising souls sell clean water door to door, claiming it's from pure springs outside the city. It costs money, which means it's not for you, and it's probably just Thames water anyway, drawn from slightly upstream and sold at a markup to people desperate enough to believe the vendor's promises. The water sellers know they're selling lies, but lies that make people feel safer have value in a city where safety doesn't actually exist. Private wells exist in some areas, but they're often worse than the Thames. These wells are typically shallow, dug right next to cesspits, which means they're essentially drawing directly from underground sewage reservoirs. The water from these wells is crystal clear, though, which convinces people it's clean because Victorian understanding of water quality is based entirely on appearance and taste rather than actual safety. Clear water full of cholera looks better than brown water full of cholera. So people choose the clear water and die anyway. Beer and gin become safer alternatives, not because Victorians are all alcoholics, though many are, but because the brewing and distilling processes involve boiling, which kills pathogens. Small beer, weak ale with low alcohol content becomes the default beverage for everyone, including children. It's not that parents want their kids drinking alcohol. It's that parents want their kids not dying of waterborne diseases. Given the choice between mild intoxication and cholera, intoxication wins every time. Tea drinking becomes popular partly because it requires boiling water, though most people don't understand why tea seems safer than plain water. They just know that tea drinkers get sick less often, which is true, but for reasons they haven't figured out yet. The poor can't afford much tea, so they buy used tea leaves from middle-class households, then rebrew them until the water is barely tinted. It's tea-flavored water at best, but at least it's been boiled. You're standing at the public pump now, holding your bucket, watching brown water splutter out. Your throat is parched from a day of physical labor in the cold. You know this water is dangerous. Everyone knows, even if they don't understand the mechanisms. But thirst is immediate, and death from cholera is merely probable. So you fill your bucket, take a drink, and hope that today isn't the day this particular glass of sewage water decides to kill you. Welcome to hydration in Victorian London, where every sip is a gamble, and the house always wins eventually. When the cold, hunger, and general misery of slum life become too much, there's always gin. Cheap, plentiful, and devastatingly strong. Gin is the working poor's anesthetic, their escape hatch from reality, and their eventual destroyer. In Victorian London, gin is everywhere, sold in gin palaces that line every street, offering a brief, warm, fuzzy reprieve from the grinding horror of daily existence. The gin palaces are designed to be irresistible. Unlike the grey, miserable slums surrounding them, these establishments are bright, warm, and welcoming. Gas lamps illuminate ornate mirrors and polished brass fixtures. The interiors are heated, which alone makes them attractive on a freezing winter evening. You can walk in from the frozen hell of the street into a warm room where for a penny or two you can temporarily forget that your life is a nightmare. The marketing is brilliant. Sell escape to people who desperately need it. The gin itself is industrial strength misery fuel. It's not the carefully crafted artisanal spirit you'd find in a modern cocktail bar. This is raw alcohol flavored with juniper and whatever other botanicals were cheap that day. Sometimes cut with turpentine or sulfuric acid to increase the burn and make it seem stronger. The proof is high enough to strip paint, and the taste is secondary to the effect. You're not drinking gin for the flavor profile, you're drinking it to achieve rapid unconsciousness as economically as possible. A penny buys you a glass. Turpent buys you 2 glasses, which is enough to get seriously drunk if you haven't eaten today, which you probably haven't. The gin hits your empty stomach like liquid fire, warming you from the inside while simultaneously destroying your liver, kidneys, and decision-making abilities. But for a few precious hours, you're not cold anymore. You're not hungry anymore. You're not aware of your failures, your freezing children, or your impossible situation. You're just floating in a warm alcoholic haze where problems exist but don't seem to matter as much. The signs advertise it openly. Drunk for a penny, dead drunk for tuppence, clean straw for nothing. That last part refers to the back rooms where customers who've achieved dead drunk status can sleep it off on straw pallets, hopefully waking up with their remaining pennies still in their pockets, though theft is common. Some people never wake up. Alcohol poisoning is a real risk when you're drinking spirits that are essentially industrial solvent with flavoring. And when you're already malnourished and exhausted, your body's tolerance is basically non-existent. Women are particularly visible in gin palaces, which is notable because respectable Victorian women aren't supposed to be seen in public drinking establishments. But respectability is a luxury that slum women can't afford. They're here for the same reason as the men. Life is unbearable, and gin makes it briefly less so. Some are drinking away their wages before going home. Others are sex workers who need to be intoxicated to do their jobs. Many are mothers who've left their children locked in cold rooms because a few hours of gin-soaked oblivion is the only break they'll get from the grinding responsibility of keeping everyone alive. The social cost of gin is catastrophic. Families disintegrate because every spare penny goes to alcohol instead of food or rent. Children starve while parents drink. Domestic violence spikes because drunk people in desperate situations make terrible decisions. The gin craze has been raging for generations, and reformers write passionate screeds about the moral degradation of the working classes, completely missing the point that maybe if people's lives weren't absolutely horrific, they wouldn't need to drink themselves into oblivion every night. The government has tried to regulate gin sales through taxation and licensing, but enforcement is impossible in a city with thousands of illegal drinking establishments in addition to the legal ones. For every gin palace with a license, there are 10 unlicensed shops, cellars and rooms selling spirits out of jugs and bottles with no oversight whatsoever. Some of this gin is even more dangerous than the legal stuff, mixed with additives that can cause blindness, paralysis, or death. Addiction is rampant and completely misunderstood. Victorian medicine views alcoholism as a moral failing rather than a disease, which means treatment consists of religious lectures and advice to just stop drinking, which is famously effective. People who want to quit often can't because their bodies are physically dependent and withdrawal can be fatal. They're trapped in a cycle where drinking is killing them, but stopping might kill them faster. You're standing outside a gin palace now, watching people stumble in and out. The warm light spills onto the frozen street, and you can hear laughter from inside. Desperate laughter that sounds more like crying. You've got tuppence in your pocket, enough for 2 glasses, enough to not feel the cold for a few hours. The rational part of your brain knows this is a terrible idea, that these tuppence should go toward food or saving for rent. But the rational part of your brain has been overruled by the cold, the hunger, the exhaustion, and the knowledge that tomorrow will be exactly as terrible as today unless you do something to make right now bearable. Welcome to self-medication Victorian style, where the cure is worse than the disease, but at least it works. Temporarily. As the day wears on and you realize you haven't earned enough to eat tonight, certain thoughts start creeping in. Specifically, thoughts about other people's pockets. Crime in Victorian slums isn't a moral failing, it's an economic strategy, a survival mechanism when legitimate work won't keep you alive. The streets are full of pickpockets, con artists, burglars, and gang members, many of them children who've learned that stealing a handkerchief might mean eating tonight. Pickpocketing is an art form in Victorian London, a skilled trade passed down from older criminals to younger apprentices. Like any respectable profession, the best pickpockets work in teams. One person creates a distraction while another lifts the wallet, then immediately passes it to a third person who disappears into the crowd. By the time the victim realizes they've been robbed, the evidence is 3 streets away, being divided up in an alley. Children are particularly effective because they're small, quick, and easy to overlook. A well-trained child pickpocket can support an entire family, which creates a perverse incentive structure where parents actively teach their children to steal. The targets are anyone who looks like they might have something worth taking. Middle-class pedestrians venturing into poor neighborhoods are prime marks. They stand out, they're uncomfortable, and they're often carrying more money than they should. Drunk people are easy targets, because their reflexes are slow and they might not even notice the theft until the next day. Market crowds are ideal hunting grounds where the crush of bodies provides cover and confusion. You watch a young boy, maybe 10, bump into a gentleman, apologize profusely, and slip away. The gentleman won't realize his pocket watch is gone until he reaches for it hours later. Burglary is riskier, but potentially more profitable. Breaking into homes while the occupants are away requires planning, nerve, and the ability to move silently. The slum dwellers who turn to burglary typically target middle-class homes rather than other poor people because robbing the poor yields nothing. You can't steal from people who have nothing. The penalties for burglary are severe, potentially including hanging or transportation to Australia, which means it's a desperate measure. But desperation is the default state in the slums. So burglars are common despite the risks. Prostitution thrives in the slums not because of any moral decay, but because it's one of the few ways women can earn money quickly. When legitimate work pays starvation wages, the prostitutes work the streets, the gin palaces, the theaters, anywhere men gather with money to spend. The work is dangerous, degrading, and often forced. Many prostitutes are supporting children or elderly relatives. Others are trying to escape even worse situations. The police harassment is constant. The risk of violence from clients is high, and the social stigma means there's no way back to respectable society even if you wanted to leave. It's survival sex work, and it's everywhere. Con games and scams run constantly. Three-card Monte dealers set up on street corners cheating marks out of their money with sleight of hand. Fake beggars pretend to be disabled, veterans or shipwrecked sailors preying on sympathy for coins. Found valuable items are sold cheap on the street except they're stolen or fake. Counterfeit coins circulate through markets passed off as real until they reach someone who can't pass them along. The entire economy of the slums operates partly on legitimate trade and partly on various forms of fraud. Organized gangs control territories, offering protection to businesses and running criminal enterprises with surprising sophistication. These aren't the romanticized gangs of later fiction. They're brutal, pragmatic operations focused on extracting money from a community that has almost none. They recruit children not out of evil, but because children are useful, small, enough to fit through windows, innocent-looking enough to avoid suspicion, desperate enough to accept terrible terms. Receiving stolen goods is a major industry. Fences operate out of shops, taverns, and private homes, buying stolen property at a fraction of its value and reselling it. They're the economic engine that makes theft profitable, providing the market for pickpocketed watches, burgled silverware, and shoplifted goods. Some fences are so established they're practically legitimate businesses, and everyone knows what they're redoing, but looks the other way because the alternative is destabilizing an entire underground economy. The police are largely ineffective in the slums. They're underfunded, outnumbered, and often corrupt themselves, taking bribes to ignore crimes or actively participating in criminal enterprises. The Metropolitan Police exist, but their presence in slum areas is minimal, and their interest in solving crimes against the poor is approximately zero. If a wealthy person is robbed, there's an investigation. If a slum dweller is robbed, there's a shrug. You're weighing your options now. Standing in an alley as evening approaches, you've earned almost nothing today, and your children are hungry. A well-dressed man walks past, distracted, his coat pocket bulging with what might be a wallet. It would be so easy. One bump, one quick hand movement, and you'd have enough for food tonight. Maybe tomorrow too. The risk is high. If you're caught, it's prison or worse. But the alternative is watching your family starve, and between crime and starvation, crime at least offers hope. Welcome to the moral calculus of poverty, where right and wrong are luxuries you can't afford. There's one place worse than the slums, and the thought of it terrifies you more than freezing to death: the workhouse. These grim institutions are meant to provide relief for the destitute, but they're designed to be so unpleasant that people would rather starve than enter them. Families are separated immediately. Men, women, and children, put in different sections, sometimes never to see each other again. The workhouse looms at the edge of every slum dweller's consciousness like a nightmare made of bricks and bureaucracy. It's the final safety net, the last stop before death, and it's deliberately designed to be more punishment than relief. The philosophy behind workhouses is simple and cruel. Poor relief should be so unpleasant that only the truly desperate will accept it. Congratulations, the system works exactly as intended, which is to say it's horrific. Entry into the workhouse means surrendering everything: your freedom, your family, your dignity, and whatever possessions you still own. You arrive at the gates, probably in the middle of winter, because that's when desperation peaks, and you're processed like livestock. Your clothes are taken away and replaced with a rough uniform that marks you as a pauper. Your hair is cut short, ostensibly for hygiene, but really as a mark of shame. You're assigned to a ward based on your age and gender. And if you came with family, you're separated immediately, Husbands and wives are placed in different buildings. Children are taken from mothers. The elderly are isolated. The message is clear. You have no rights. Here, the food in the workhouse is deliberately inadequate, calculated to keep you alive but miserable. Breakfast is watery GR, the same thin oak paste you might have had in the slums, but somehow even worse. Lunch is bread and cheese, measured portions designed to provide minimum sustenance. Dinner is more GRL or occasionally soup that's mostly water with vegetable rumors. The portions are small, the quality is terrible, and it's the same every single day. After weeks of this diet, you're weaker than when you entered, which is by design. The workhouse isn't trying to rehabilitate you, it's trying to make you leave. The work is brutal and pointless. Men are assigned to break stones, literally smashing large rocks into smaller rocks with hammers, creating materials for road paving. It's back-breaking labor that serves a purpose, but is assigned in such quantities that it becomes torturous. Women pick, which means unraveling old rope fibers with their bare hands until their fingers bleed and become deformed. The rope is treated with tar and salt, which works its way into every cut and crack in your skin. Children work in the open rooms too. Their small hands, better suited to the task but equally damaged by it. The work produces something of value, but the real goal is punishment and deterrence. The rules are oppressively strict. No talking during meals, no leaving your assigned area, no physical contact with family members, even if you happen to see them during chapel or exercise periods. Breaking rules results in punishment, reduced rations, solitary confinement, or assignment to even worse tasks. The workhouse master has absolute authority, and many abuse it, ruling their institutions like personal thieves, where cruelty is policy and compassion is weakness. Disease spreads rapidly in workhouses because you're packing malnourished, weakened people into crowded wards with poor ventilation and inadequate sanitation. Typhoid, cholera, tuberculosis, they all thrive here. The sick wards are essentially death rooms, where people go to die slowly while being tended by other paupers who have no medical training. If you enter the workhouse healthy, you probably won't leave that way. If you enter sick, you probably won't leave at all. The social stigma of the workhouse is profound and permanent. If you've been in the workhouse, everyone knows it marks you as someone who failed so completely at life that you had to accept public charity under the worst possible terms. Future employers won't hire you. Neighbors will avoid you. You're tainted by association with absolute poverty, and in Victorian society, poverty is viewed as a moral failing rather than an economic condition. Children raised in workhouses face particularly grim prospects. They receive minimal education, usually just enough literacy to read the Bible and enough arithmetic to count. They're trained for the lowest forms of labor: domestic service for girls, manual labor for boys. Many are apprenticed out to factories or workshops where they are essentially slave labor until age 21. The workhouse produces generations of workers, conditioned to accept terrible conditions because they've never known anything else. Some people spend years in workhouses, growing old within the walls, never accumulating enough resources to leave. They become institutionalized, losing whatever skills and spirit they once had. The workhouse becomes their entire world, a gray purgatory where nothing changes except the faces of fellow inmates who arrive desperate and leave dead. You're standing outside the workhouse gates now, not entering, just looking. You've heard the stories, you know what happens inside, and you've made a decision that countless slum dwellers make every day. Anything is better than this. Starvation, freezing, crime, prostitution, whatever it takes. You'll endure it all before you walk through these gates and surrender what's left of your humanity. Welcome to Victorian social welfare, where help is designed to hurt and relief comes with total destruction of everything that makes life worth living. As the sun sets, which happens ridiculously early in winter, the temperature drops even further. You'd think it couldn't get colder, but Victorian London winters are here to prove you wrong. The fog thickens, turning yellow-green as thousands more coal fires are lit for the evening. The streets, already dangerous during the day, become truly treacherous at night. The darkness comes fast and absolute. There are gas street lamps in the wealthier areas, but in the slums, lighting is minimal to non-existent. A few sputtering lamps cast weak pools of yellow light that barely penetrate the thickening fog, creating isolated islands of dim visibility in an ocean of darkness. Between the lamps there's nothing but black, and that black is full of people, animals, obstacles, and danger. Walking the slum streets at night means navigating by memory, sound, and luck, hoping you don't trip over something or someone. The cold at night is different from daytime cold. It's sharper, more aggressive, like it's been waiting all day for the sun to leave so it can really get to work, killing you. The temperature plummets to well below freezing, and with the humidity from the fog it creates a bone-deep chill that no amount of layering can fully block. Your breath comes out in great clouds of steam that immediately mix with the fog, making it even harder to see. Your face goes numb first, then your hands, despite being jammed into your armpits for warmth. Your feet, wet from walking through slush and filth all day, are now frozen blocks of pain at the ends of your legs. The streets empty somewhat as people retreat to their hovels, but not completely. Night workers are coming out, prostitutes taking their positions on corners, thieves emerging to work under cover of darkness, night soilmen beginning their awful rounds, collecting human waste from privies. The legitimate world is shutting down while the shadow economy ramps up. Pubs and gin palaces are doing brisk business, their doors opening and closing in bursts of warm air, light, and sound that make the street seem even colder and darker. By contrast, the sounds of evening are distinct and unsettling. Dogs bark in the distance, babies cry from windows above, someone shouting, whether in an anger, pain, or drunkenness is unclear. Glass breaks somewhere, footsteps echo on, cobblestones, impossibly loud in the fog, making it impossible to judge distance or direction. You hear someone approaching but can't see them until they're nearly on top of you, which is terrifying every single time because you never know if it's a neighbor, a thief, or a police constable looking for someone to harass. Getting home is a challenge because you're exhausted, frozen, and navigating streets you can barely see. You're using landmarks you've memorized, the broken lamppost on the corner, the shop with the crooked sign, the alley that smells slightly worse than the other alleys. One wrong turn and you could end up lost in a maze of identical dark streets, all of them dangerous. People die from exposure just trying to find their way home, collapsing in alleys and freezing to death mere blocks from their lodgings. The buildings loom out of the fog like ghost ships, their windows either completely dark because residents can't afford light, or dimly glowing with the yellow-orange of candles or small fires. You can see silhouettes moving behind grimy glass, shadowy figures going through the motions of evening routines. The sounds of domestic life filter out, arguments, crying children, coughing that never stops. Every window is a tiny vignette of suffering multiplied across thousands of buildings. Crime increases at night because darkness provides cover, and desperation peaks after a day of failed attempts to earn money. Muggings are common. A quick blow to the head, rifled through pockets, and the thief disappears into the fog before the victim can even shout for help. Not that shouting helps much. The police response time is measured in never for slum areas. Women walking alone are at serious risk of assault, which is why most traveling groups are not at all after dark. The streets belong to predators, both human and rat. You finally reach your tenement building, recognizable only because you've lived here long enough to know its particular combination of structural decay and geographic location. The doorway is crowded with people who are either trying to stay warm before going inside to the even colder interior, or who have nowhere else to go and are hoping for shelter in a semi-protected alcove. You push through, climb the creaking stairs in near total darkness, and reach your room. Inside, nothing has improved. It's still freezing, still crowded, still miserable, but it's marginally less frozen than outside, and that marginal difference is what passes for comfort. Your roommates are already there, huddled near a fire someone has managed to coax into existence. their faces lit from below like something from a gothic horror story. Children are being put to bed, which means being wrapped in every available scrap of fabric and placed on straw mattresses that will provide minimal insulation against the cold rising from the floor below. The day is ending, but the suffering isn't. It's just transitioning from active suffering, working, walking, struggling to passive suffering, trying to sleep while cold, hungry, and surrounded by the sounds of other people's misery. Welcome to evening in Victorian London, where the darkness is literal and metaphorical, and tomorrow promises to be exactly the same. If you've managed to earn or steal enough money today, you might be able to buy something resembling dinner. Street vendors sell hot pies, baked potatoes, soup, fried fish, and other foods that range from barely nutritious to actively dangerous. The pies, for instance, are notoriously filled with mystery meat. That could be anything from horse to cat to rat, all seasoned heavily to mask the taste of decay. You've scraped together fourpence from today's earnings, which means dinner is possible but not guaranteed to be satisfying or safe. The street food vendors are still operating despite the cold and darkness, their carts lit by oil lamps that cast flickering light on their dubious offerings. The smell of cooking food, any food, is almost overwhelming after a day of hunger, and your stomach is making demands your wallet can barely meet. The fried fish seller is doing steady business, pulling pieces of unidentifiable fish from boiling oil and wrapping them in newspaper. The fish is cheap because it's the bits that proper fishers can't sell. Heads, tails, organs, and pieces that might have been sitting around for a few days too long. It's been fried into oblivion, cooked until it's crispy and brown, which has the dual benefit of making it taste better and killing most of the dangerous bacteria. Most, not all. You buy a portion for tuppence and eat it immediately, the hot grease burning your mouth but warming your insides. The taste mostly oil and salt with a vague suggestion of fish underneath. The pie sellers are everywhere, their carts stacked with small meat pies that promise heartiness and deliver mystery. The crusts are thick and tough, designed to hold together rather than taste good, baked until they're nearly indestructible. The filling is brown, gravy-heavy, and contains chunks of something that was once an animal. Though which animal is anyone's guess, the vendors will swear it's beef or mutton. But rumors circulate constantly about cats going missing near pie shops, about dead horses being butchered in back alleys, about rats being trapped and sold as small game. You've learned not to ask questions and not to think too hard about what you're eating. Protein is protein, and if it's been cooked thoroughly enough, it probably won't kill you immediately. The potato sellers offer the safest option, but also the blandest. A baked potato for a penny, larger if you pay tuppence served, with a scraping of butter if you're willing to pay an extra halfpenny. You watch people buying them, juggling the hot potatoes from hand to hand, using them first as hand warmers and then as food. It's practical warmth that you can eventually eat. The potatoes are filling, if nothing else, providing starch and a brief feeling of fullness that won't last more than a few hours, but is better than nothing. Soup vendors push carts through the slums selling bowls of hot liquid that's optimistically called soup, but is more accurately described as hot water with vegetable memories. For a penny, you get a bowl filled with brownish liquid containing perhaps 3 pieces of carrot, an onion slice, and what might be a potato chunk if you're lucky. There's no meat, no fat, no real nutrition, but it's hot and wet, which makes it valuable on a frozen evening. People drink it standing in the street, holding the bowls with both hands for warmth, slurping the liquid and chewing the few solid pieces slowly to make the experience last. Some people aren't buying from vendors at all. They're going home to whatever food they managed to prepare earlier or save from previous days. This might be bread, stale, hard, possibly moldy, soaked in hot water to soften it into something chewable. Or it's the remnants of the morning's GRL, reheated if they can afford the fuel, eaten cold if they can't. Families gather around single bowls, sharing portions that aren't enough for one person, let alone 4 or 5. Parents give larger shares to children while pretending they're not hungry themselves, a lie everyone recognizes, but nobody challenges. In the worst cases, there is no dinner. The day's work earned nothing, or what it earned had to go to rent or debt, leaving nothing for food. These families go to bed hungry, bellies cramping, children crying from hunger pains that their parents can't relieve. Some try to fill their stomachs with water, drinking until they're uncomfortably full, creating the temporary illusion of satiation that fools nobody, especially not their bodies, which know the difference between water and nutrition. The taverns and public houses serve food along with alcohol, usually stews or soups that sit simmering for hours or days, with new ingredients added to the pot as old ones are ladled out. The stew gets darker, thicker, and more mysterious as the week progresses, accumulating flavors and questionable ingredients until it's finally dumped and started fresh on Monday. But it's hot, it's filling, and if you're drinking there anyway, a bowl of stew for tuppence seems like a reasonable investment in not collapsing from hunger. You finished your fried fish and still feel hungry, which is your permanent state, but at least you've eaten something. The fourpence is gone. Tuppence for fish, tuppence saved for tomorrow's breakfast, assuming you don't spend it on something else tonight. The arithmetic of poverty is endless. Every penny allocated, every meal planned, every expense weighed against every other expense with the knowledge that there's never enough money to cover actual needs. Around you, others are finishing their dinners too. A family shares a single pie, tearing it into pieces with their hands and distributing it carefully to ensure everyone gets some. An old manner's on a piece of bread so hard it might have been used as a weapon earlier. Children lick their bowls clean, their tongues chasing every last drop of soup or trace of grease. Welcome to dinner in Victorian London, where eating is a generous description for consuming whatever you can afford that probably won't kill you. And full is a feeling you remember from childhood but haven't experienced in years. Despite the cold, the hunger, and the general awfulness of existence, Victorian slum dwellers still seek entertainment. The human spirit is annoyingly persistent like that. Penny dreadfuls, those lurid, serialized stories about crime and horror, are passed around and read aloud. Music halls offer cheap seats where you can watch bawdy performances, sing along to popular songs, and forget for an hour that your life is a frozen misery. The penny dreadfuls are exactly what they sound like, cheaply printed, serialized stories sold for a penny per installment featuring tales of murder, mystery, gothic horror, and sensational crime. They have titles like Vanny the Vampire or The String of Pearls, which introduce Sweeney Todd, the demon barber, and they're designed to be as lurid and shocking as possible to keep readers coming back for the next installment. For people who can read, and literacy is higher than you might think in the slums, thanks to charity, schools, and self-eating, these stories are addictive entertainment. A brief escape into a world where the violence is fictional and the horror is contained on the page rather than in your daily life. The penny dreadfuls get passed around until they're literally falling apart, read by candlelight in crowded rooms, with literate family members reading aloud to those who can't read themselves. Children are particularly enthralled by these stories, though they're absolutely not appropriate for children, filled with graphic violence, sexual innuendo, and terrifying imagery. But appropriate is a luxury concept, and parents are usually too tired to police their children's reading material. Besides, after spending the day watching actual violence and horror in the streets, fictional murder seems almost quaint. The music halls are the main source of live entertainment for the working class, offering a wild mix of comedy, music, dance, acrobatics, and borderline obscene performances that would scandalize the middle classes but delight slum audiences. For 3 pints or 6 pints, you can get into the gallery. The cheap seats at the top where the view is terrible, but the atmosphere is electric. The halls are warm, packed with people, and filled with a smell of beer, sweat, and tobacco, smoke thick enough to choke on. The performers are a mixed bag, comedians telling jokes about poverty, politics, and bodily functions, singers belting out popular songs that everyone knows the words to, dancers in increasingly scanty costumes, and novelty acts featuring anything from trained dogs to men who can dislocate their joints. The content is bawdy, irreverent, and often politically subversive in ways that go over the heads of authorities, but land perfectly with working-class audiences. Songs mock the wealthy, celebrate drinking and romance, and tell stories of ordinary people outwitting their supposed betters. The audience participation is what makes music halls special. People don't sit quietly. They sing along, shout encouragement or insults at performers, throw things, hopefully coins for performers they like, vegetables for ones they don't, and generally treat the whole experience as interactive entertainment. It's chaotic, loud, and genuinely fun. One of the few times slum dwellers can let loose without judgment or consequence. You're not just watching entertainment, you're part of it. And that collective energy is intoxicating in a way that has nothing to do with the beer you're drinking. Street entertainment is free and constant. Buskers set up on corners playing fiddles, accordions, or penny whistles, hoping for coins from passers-by. Some are talented musicians fallen on hard times. Others are enthusiastic amateurs whose enthusiasm exceeds their ability, but who perform anyway because a few pennies from busking beat starvation. Puppet shows entertain children with Punch and Judy performing their violent slapstick routines that somehow never get old despite being completely predictable. Gambling is a major form of entertainment, though calling it entertainment is generous when it's also a way people lose money they desperately need. Card games, dice games, bare-knuckle boxing matches, rat baiting, competitions where terriers are timed killing rats in a pit. Anything people can bet on becomes a spectator sport. The gambling dens are smoky, crowded rooms where men, mostly men, risk their wages on games that are often rigged, hoping that this time luck will favor them and they'll win enough to change their circumstances. Spoiler, they won't. But hope is a powerful drug. Drinking establishments double as social clubs where people gather not just to drink but to talk, gossip, argue, and connect with others. The pub is where you hear news, both factual and rumor. It's where political discussions happen, where revolutionary ideas are shared in whispers, where community bonds are formed and maintained. For the price of a pint, you buy not just alcohol but admission to a social space. And in a world where your home is a crowded, miserable room, the social space is valuable. Children create their own entertainment with nothing. They play games with sticks, stones, and hoops. They make up elaborate fantasy games where they pretend to be people who aren't cold and starving. They sing songs learned from adults or invented themselves. Their capacity for finding joy in nothing is both heartbreaking and inspiring. They're living in conditions that would break most adults. Yet they still laugh, still play, still find moments of childhood, even when childhood is supposed to be impossible. Some entertainment is darker. Public hangings draw enormous crowds who treat executions as spectator events, packing into viewing areas to watch people die. It's grim and says troubling things about society, but it's also free entertainment. And in the economy of poverty, free matters more than appropriate. The crowds are festive, vendors sell food, and people discuss the condemned crimes like they're analyzing a theatrical performance. Welcome to entertainment in Victorian London, where fun is whatever distracts you from the fact that you're cold, hungry, and probably dying slowly, and where the human need for joy persists, even when joy has no logical reason to exist. Sunday brings a different kind of obligation church. For slum dwellers, religion is complicated. On one hand, churches offer the only real charity available. Soup kitchens use clothing, occasional coal for heating. On the other hand, the sermons often blame the poor for their own poverty, suggesting that if you were more moral, more hard-working, more God-fearing, you wouldn't be living in a frozen death trap eating rat-adjacent pie. The church attendance is mandatory in the sense that nothing is technically forcing you to go, but the social and practical consequences of not going make it effectively required. The parish church keeps track of who attends and who doesn't, and being known as someone who skips services can affect your access to charity, your reputation in the community, and even your employment prospects. Good Christian character is often a requirement for jobs, and employers ask local priests for references. So even if you'd rather sleep in on your one day off, you drag yourself to church because not going has consequences you can't afford. The churches themselves are marginally warmer than your tenement, which is honestly a significant part of their appeal. They're large stone, buildings that retain some heat from the bodies packed inside, and sitting on a wooden pew surrounded by other people provides more warmth than you'd get alone at home. Some people come to church primarily for the heating, treating it as a warming station that happens to include religious content. They're not listening to the sermon. They're just grateful to be somewhere that isn't actively trying to freeze them to death. The sermons are a mixed bag of genuine spiritual guidance and Victorian moralizing that ranges from tone-deaf to actively insulting. Ministers preach about the dignity of poverty, suggesting that being poor is actually a spiritual advantage because it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. This is supposed to be comforting. Congratulations, boys. Your suffering has spiritual value, but it rings hollow when the minister giving this sermon is wealthed, warmly dressed, and living in a comfortable vicarage, while you're literally dying from malnutrition and exposure. The concept of the deserving poor versus the undeserving poor permeates religious charity. Churches will help you if they deem you morally worthy. If you're sober, attend services regularly, demonstrate appropriate gratitude, and generally behave like a properly humble poor person. But if you're seen drinking, if you miss services, if you show any sign of not being sufficiently grateful or pious, charity evaporates. The message is clear. We'll help you survive, but only if you perform poverty in the way we approve of. The charity work churches do is genuinely helpful despite the condescension that accompanies it. Soup kitchens provide meals to those who have nothing, though you usually have to sit through a religious lecture before eating. Clothing donations give people access to second-hand garments they couldn't otherwise afford. Though the clothes are usually the cast-offs that nobody else wanted. Cold distributions in winter can mean the difference between freezing and not, though the amounts given are never quite enough and always come with strings attached. Sunday schools are one of the more positive religious institutions offering free basic education to children who would otherwise receive none. They teach reading using the Bible as a textbook, which means literacy comes packaged with religious indoctrination. But literacy is literacy. Many slum children learn their letters sitting on church benches memorizing scripture while also gaining skills that might eventually help them escape poverty. The teachers are usually volunteers motivated by genuine desire to help, though their methods are heavy on memorization and light on actual understanding. The religious culture emphasizes acceptance of suffering as God's will, which is convenient for people in power and devastating for those suffering. If poverty is part of God's plan, then maybe you shouldn't fight against it. If your current misery is a test of faith or punishment for sin, then maybe you deserve it. This theology of acceptance helps maintain social order by discouraging rebellion, but it also provides genuine comfort to people who need to believe their suffering has meaning beyond random cruelty. Different denominations offer different flavors of religion. The Church of England is the establishment option, formal and hierarchical. Methodist and Baptist chapels attract working-class congregations with more emotional, participatory services. Catholic churches serve the Irish immigrant population with familiar rituals from home. Salvation Army missions offer practical help along with salvation. Each has its own approach, but all share the basic framework. Accept Jesus, behave morally, and maybe your afterlife won't be as terrible as your current life. Prayer is a constant background activity in slum life. People pray before meals, before sleep, when sick, when scared, when desperate. Prayer costs nothing and offers the possibility of divine intervention, which is appealing when human intervention is non-existent. Whether anyone's listening is unknowable, but the act of praying provides psychological comfort, a feeling that you're doing something rather than passively accepting suffering. Religious holidays provide brief breaks from grinding poverty. Christmas brings charity distributions, special meals, and a general atmosphere of goodwill that results in slightly better treatment from employers and slightly more generous almsgiving. Easter means spring is coming, which means not freezing anymore. Saints' days offer occasions for minor celebrations and sometimes associated charity efforts. Some people find genuine spiritual fulfillment in religion, a deep personal faith that sustains them through hardship. Others go through the motions, treating church as a social obligation and charity access point rather than genuine spiritual practice. Most fall somewhere between believing enough to find comfort, but skeptical enough to recognize that religion isn't actually solving their material problems. You're sitting in church now on a hard wooden pew surrounded by other cold, hungry people. The minister is talking about how blessed are the poor, how the meek shall inherit the earth, how suffering brings you closer to God. You're trying to decide if you believe any of it, or if you're just here because afterward they redistributing bread to the needy and you qualify as definitely needy. Welcome to Religion in Victorian Slums, where faith is part genuine belief, part survival strategy, and part the only game in town when you need help and have nowhere else to turn. Eventually, probably sooner rather than later, you get sick, really sick. The combination of a malnutrition, exposure, overwork, toxic air, contaminated water, and close quarters with diseased people means illness is inevitable. You wake up one morning with a fever or a cough or pains in your chest, and you know this could be it, because in Victorian slums there's no such thing as a simple cold. The fever hits you like a physical blow, sudden and overwhelming. One moment you're uncomfortably cold as usual, the next moment you're burning from the inside while simultaneously shivering uncontrollably. Your head pounds with a pain that makes thinking impossible. Your joints ache like someone's beaten you with clubs. You try to stand and the room spins sickeningly. This isn't the mild illness you can work through. This is your body staging a full rebellion and demanding you stop immediately. But stopping means not working, and not working means no income. And no income means your family doesn't eat, so you try anyway. You drag yourself upright, pull on your frozen clothes, and attempt to make it to work. You make it as far as the stairwell before your legs give out, and you collapse against the wall, sweating and shaking. Your body has made its decision. You're not working today. Maybe not tomorrow either. The question now is whether you'll recover, or whether this is the illness that finally kills you. Your roommates are sympathetic but also terrified. They can see you're sick, which means they're probably next because contagion spreads through cramped quarters like fire through dry wood. Some people immediately distance themselves, moving to the far side of the room and avoiding contact. Others, usually family members, reluctantly help you back to your corner where you collapse onto your straw mattress and begin the process of either recovering or dying. There's no doctor coming. Doctors cost money. And even if you had money, most doctors won't come to slum areas because they view the poor as lost causes and the neighborhoods as disease-ridden death traps. The few doctors who do work in poor areas are overwhelmed, underfunded, and often just as likely to kill you with their treatments as the disease itself. Bloodletting, purging, mercury, arsenic. Victorian medicine has a lot of confidence and very little actual effectiveness. Instead, you get folk remedies passed down through generations. Treatments that range from probably harmless to actively making things worse. Someone brings you a pus made from bread and milk, pressing it against your chest where the pain is worst. Someone else makes you drink a tea brewed from herbs that taste like punishment and probably do nothing except make you vomit, which they interpret as getting the poison out rather than this tea is toxic. A neighbor suggests rubbing goose grease on your chest and back, which makes you smell like a barnyard but provides no medical benefit whatsoever. The fever breaks after 2 days or it doesn't. If it breaks, you lie there weak and shaking, having survived this round, but permanently weakened for the next illness. If it doesn't break, the fever climbs higher. You become delirious, and people start making that face, they're probably not going to make it face, that you've seen too many times before. Delirious patients say strange things, see people who aren't there, try to get up and go to work despite being unable to stand. They need constant watching to prevent them from hurting themselves or wandering off into the streets. The cough is the worst part, a deep, wet, rattling sound that shakes your whole body and produces grey, black phlegm stray with blood. Every coughing fit feels like your lungs are being torn apart from the inside. You cough so hard you vomit. You cough so hard you wet yourself. You cough so hard that your ribs crack, which then makes breathing even more painful. The cough keeps everyone awake at night, a constant reminder that disease is here, in this room, and it's not done yet. Food becomes impossible. Your throat is raw from coughing, your stomach rejects everything, and you have no appetite anyway because fever does that. But you need to eat to recover. So people force broth or watery GR into you, and you force yourself to swallow. Even though it feels like swallowing broken glass, most of it comes back up. The little that stays down isn't nearly enough to fuel recovery, but it's something. The other people in your room are making calculations. Should they stay and risk infection or leave and abandon you? Some leave, finding excuses to sleep elsewhere until the danger passes. Others stay out of loyalty, family obligation, or just fatalism. They figure they're probably already infected anyway, so they might as well help. These people will probably be the next ones sick. Continuing the cycle of disease through the community, days blur together, you drift in and out of consciousness, aware of people moving around you, voices that sound distant and distorted. Someone's washing your face with a cold cloth. Someone's trying to make you drink something. Someone's praying over you, which is either comforting or ominous depending on how aware you are at that moment. Time loses meaning when you're this sick. You might have been lying here for 3 days or 3 weeks. There's no way to tell. Eventually, you either recover enough to function again or you don't. If you do recover, you're profoundly weak. Having lost weight, you couldn't afford to lose and damage to lungs or other organs that you'll carry forever. You'll need to return to work immediately, despite being barely able to stand because rent still comes due and hunger doesn't wait for recovery. If you don't recover, you become another statistic. Another slum death recorded in parish registers with a cause of death like fever or consumption that tells future historians very little about what actually killed you. Your body, already weakened by years of malnutrition and exposure, isn't designed to withstand serious illness. You have no reserves, no safety margin. Every illness is potentially fatal because you're always operating at the edge of survival. A middle-class person might shake off this same illness with a week of bed rest and good food. You might not shake it off at all. Welcome to being sick in Victorian London, where illness is inevitable, treatment is medieval, and recovery is more about luck than medical intervention. Try not to cough on anyone, though in these quarters it's already too late for that. Very occasionally, against all odds, something good happens. Maybe you find a whole shilling in the street. Maybe the sun comes out for an hour and you actually feel warm. Maybe someone gives you a meat pie that's only mostly questionable. Maybe you laugh at something, genuinely laugh, and for just a moment forget that you're cold, hungry, and probably not going to live past 40. Today is one of those days. You woke up and your body hurt slightly less than usual. The fog lifted by mid-am morning, revealing actual sunlight. Weak winter, sunlight, but sunlight nonetheless. And then, incredibly, you got work at the docks on your first try, which never happens. The foreman pointed at you immediately, and you spent the day doing back-breaking labor that somehow felt less soul-crushing than usual, probably because you knew you'd actually have money at the end of it. By afternoon, you'd earned a full 2 shillings, which is double what you usually make on a good day. 2 whole shillings. You stood there holding the coins, feeling their weight in your palm, and for a brief moment experienced something you'd almost forgotten. Optimism. Not the naive optimism of childhood, but the hard-won, cautious optimism of someone who's learned not to trust good fortune, but can't help feeling a tiny spark of hope. Anyway, you used some of the money practically, bought a real dinner, not street scraps, but an actual meal from a pub, a bowl of stew that was hot, thick, and contained identifiable vegetables and chunks of meat that probably came from an actual farm animal. You ate slowly, savoring every bite, making it last as long as possible. The warmth spread through your body, and for the first time in weeks, you felt genuinely full. Not just no longer actively starving, but actually properly full. Your stomach stopped cramping. The constant gnawing hunger that's been your companion for so long went quiet. And then something even more unlikely happened. You bought your children a treat. A bag of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor, still warm, fragrant, with that distinctive nutty smell. You brought them home and watched your children's faces light up with genuine joy. The kind of pure, uncomplicated happiness that children can still access even when life is terrible. They split the chestnuts carefully, making sure everyone got equal shares, eating them slowly to make the experience last. Your youngest actually laughed, while trying to peel the shells, and the sound was so unexpected and beautiful that you felt your throat tighten. The evening was mild by Victorian winter standards, which means merely cold, rather than life-threateningly frozen. You sat outside your building with neighbors, not because it was pleasant, but because it was tolerable, and after months of it being intolerable, tolerable felt like luxury. Someone had a bottle of ale they were sharing. Someone else told a joke that was actually funny, rather than just desperately trying to be funny. People laughed together, a real communal moment of lightness that had nothing to do with gin or desperation, and everything to do with humans connecting over something other than shared misery. A street musician set up nearby, playing fiddle with genuine skill rather than the desperate soaring of someone who doesn't know how to play but needs the pennies. The music was actually pleasant, a lively tune that made a few children dance in the street, their movements clumsy and joyful. You found yourself tapping your foot, something you haven't done in so long you'd forgotten your body could move in ways that weren't purely functional. Someone started singing along, then others joined in, and suddenly there was an impromptu concert happening in your miserable slum street. Voices rising, together in a song everyone knew. You joined in, your voice rusty from disuse, and felt connected to something larger than your individual struggle. For these few minutes, you weren't alone in your suffering. You were part of a community, people who understood each other's pain but could still find moments of beauty amid the horror. The sun set as it always does, but tonight the sunset was actually visible through a break in the clouds, streaks of orange and pink across the grey London sky. You stood there watching it, something you never do because sunsets don't feed children or pay rent. But tonight you watched anyway. It was beautiful, actually genuinely beautiful, and you allowed yourself to appreciate it without immediately calculating its practical value. Your children went to bed with full stomachs for once. Your body wasn't actively hurting. You had a few coins left for tomorrow. These small mercies added up to something that almost resembled contentment, and you sat there in the cold evening air, feeling something you'd almost forgotten existed. Gratitude. Not the forced gratitude that sermons demand, but real appreciation for a day that hadn't tried to kill you. Of course, the rational part of your brain knows this is temporary. Tomorrow will probably be terrible again, the weather will turn, work will be scarce, hunger will return. This good day is an anomaly, not a new normal. But right now, in this moment, you're allowing yourself to feel good, without immediately undermining it with realistic pessimism. You're letting yourself have this. A neighbor's baby, usually crying, is sleeping quietly. The elderly woman who's been sick seems slightly better sitting up and talking. The man who lost his job last week found new work. These small victories multiplied across your community create an atmosphere that's almost hopeful. It won't last, but it exists right now, and that's enough. You eventually go inside, climbing the stairs to your room, and for once, the space doesn't feel quite as oppressive. It's still freezing, still crowded, still damp, but tonight those facts seem less overwhelming. You lie down on your straw mattress, pull your threadbare blanket over yourself, and fall asleep without the usual hours of lying awake worrying about survival. Welcome to a rare good day in Victorian London, where happiness is relative, luck is temporary, and joy is measured in small increments that wouldn't register as positive to anyone not living in absolute poverty. But when your baseline is suffering, even marginal improvement feels like winning the lottery. Tomorrow will probably be terrible again, but today wasn't, and that's worth remembering. Night falls again and you've survived another day, which is actually an achievement worth celebrating in Victorian London slums. You shuffle back to your tenement, climb the creaking stairs, and return to your corner of the shared room. The fire has been relit, creating a small circle of warmth that 17 people are trying to huddle around simultaneously. The evening routine is depressingly familiar. You remove your outer layers, coat, scarf, whatever additional rags you've wrapped around yourself, but you keep most of your clothes on because undressing means exposing yourself to the cold, and the cold is always waiting. Your boots, soaked through from walking in slush and filth all day, come off reluctantly. Your feet are wrinkled, gray, and smell like decay, but they're still attached and mostly functional, which counts as a win. Around you, others are going through similar motions. The family in the corner is settling their children, wrapping them in every available piece of fabric and tucking them into their communal sleeping space. The children protest weakly. They're still hungry, still cold, still uncomfortable. But exhaustion is winning, and one by one they drift into fitful sleep, punctuated by coughing and whimpering. Their mother sits nearby, not sleeping yet, watching them with an expression that's part love, part despair, wondering how much longer she can keep them alive. The old woman, who is barely alive this morning, is still here, still breathing, which is surprising and vaguely encouraging. She's huddled under a blanket that's more holes than fabric, muttering to herself, possibly praying, possibly just talking to people who aren't there anymore. Nobody bothers her. She's earned the right to mutter. She survived this long in conditions that kill most people decades younger. Someone's brought home a small amount of coal, probably stolen from a barge or scavenged from a railyard, and it's being added to the fire with the careful deliberation of someone handling diamonds. Each piece is placed precisely to maximize heat while minimizing consumption. The coal will last maybe 2 hours if they're careful, providing a brief window of almost warmth before the fire dies back down to embers, and everyone has to survive on body heat alone. Conversations are sparse and quiet. Everyone's too tired for extensive talking, but there's a low murmur of voices discussing the day's events, sharing information about where work might be found tomorrow, warning about which streets to avoid because the police are cracking down on something, spreading gossip about who died, who got arrested, who managed to find a better situation. It's the Slum News Network, oral tradition keeping the community informed in the absence of newspapers or official communication. You count your remaining money, the coins clutched in your fist so tightly they've left impressions in your palm. 3 pints, enough for tomorrow's breakfast if you're careful, or enough for today's rent if the landlord comes demanding payment. You can't afford both, which means you have to gamble on which is more immediately critical, food or shelter. It's a choice nobody should have to make, but it's one you make almost daily. The sounds of the building settle into their nighttime rhythm, babies crying, people coughing, couples arguing, someone praying aloud, footsteps on the stairs, rats scratching in the walls. It's a cacophony that somehow becomes white noise so familiar you've stopped really hearing it. This is the soundtrack of your life, the ambient sound of poverty and suffering occurring simultaneously in hundreds of rooms stacked vertically in a building that probably shouldn't still be standing. Sleep comes gradually, not because you're comfortable, but because your body simply can't stay awake anymore. Exhaustion overrides discomfort. You arrange yourself on your straw mattress, pull your coat over yourself as a blanket, and try to find a position where nothing hurts too much. This is impossible. Everything hurts. So you settle for a position where the pain is distributed somewhat evenly. Your last thoughts before sleep are the same as every night. Did I earn enough today? Will there be work tomorrow? Will we make rent? Will the children survive the winter? Will I? These questions circle in your mind like vultures. But eventually, even the anxiety can't keep you awake, and you drift off into dreams that are probably not much better than your waking life. Around you, 17 other people are doing the same thing, finding sleep, however they can. Their breathing creating a fog of condensation that hangs in the cold air. Bodies shift and adjust throughout the night as people try to find warmth, leading to an unconscious choreography of survival where everyone instinctively moves toward heat sources and away from drafts. The fire dies down to embers, then to ash. The temperature drops further. Someone gets up to use the chamber pot, their movement waking. Several others who then also need to go, creating a brief period of shuffling and muttering before everyone settles again. The elderly woman's breathing rattles ominously, and you wonder if she'll make it to morning. Many nights, someone doesn't. Outside, the city never fully sleeps. You can hear carriages in the distance, police whistles, the occasional shout. London continues its business even in the dead of night, indifferent to the thousands of people trying to survive just one more night in conditions that would kill most people, from more comfortable backgrounds within days. But you're not most people. You're a Victorian slum dweller, which means you've developed a kind of resilience that's part physical adaptation, part psychological shutdown, and part sheer, stubborn refusal to die. You've survived today, you'll try to survive tomorrow. That's as far ahead as you can plan, as far as your mental energy allows. The night stretches ahead, long and cold and uncomfortable, but it's just another night in an endless series of nights. You've done this before. You'll do it again tomorrow, assuming you wake up, which is never guaranteed, but is probable enough to bet on. Your breathing slows, your muscles relax fractionally, and despite the cold, the hunger, the discomfort, the uncertainty, and the very real possibility that you might not wake up, you sleep. Because sleeping is surviving, and surviving is the only victory that matters. Welcome to another night in Victorian London. Slums, where making it through to morning is an achievement, where rest is never truly restful, and where tomorrow promises to be exactly as hard as today. But tomorrow can wait. Right now you're alive, and that's enough. So you made it. You survived a full day and night in a Victorian London slum during winter. Congratulations. You experienced cold that modern heating systems have made us forget existed. You navigated streets that were basically open sewers frozen solid. You worked jobs that destroyed your body for wages that wouldn't buy a coffee in today's world. You ate food of questionable origin and even more questionable safety. You shared a room with more people than a modern elevator holds, plus livestock. And somehow, against all odds, you made it to the next morning. The people who actually lived this weren't heroes in some grand, historical narrative. They were just ordinary humans trying to survive in conditions that were designed either through malice or indifference to kill them. They woke up every day not knowing if they'd eat. They went to work not knowing if they'd be injured or paid. They went to sleep not knowing if they'd wake up. And yet, they persisted generation after generation with a resilience that's almost incomprehensible to us now. They didn't just survive, though. They laughed. They loved. They raised children, and told stories and sang songs, and found moments of joy in circumstances that had no logical reason to produce joy. They built communities in the ruins. They helped neighbors even when they had nothing to give. They proved that the human spirit is annoyingly, persistently, beautifully stubborn. These weren't different kinds of humans. They were us born into circumstances we can barely imagine. Same hopes, same fears, same capacity for suffering and joy. They wanted what we want: safety, warmth, enough food, a future for their children. They just had to fight infinitely harder for those basic things, and most of them lost that fight. So tonight, as you lie in your warm bed with your thermostat set to a comfortable temperature, with clean water available at the turn of a tap, with food in your refrigerator and medicine in your cabinet, take a moment to appreciate it. Not in a be grateful, you don't have it worse guilt trip way, but in genuine recognition that the comfort you're experiencing right now would seem like impossible luxury to the millions of people who froze their way through Victorian winters. The Victorian slum dwellers who survived those brutal winters are your ancestors spiritually, if not literally. They endured so that eventually generations later someone might not have to. Progress is real, even if it's slower and more uneven than we'd like. The fact that you're not currently sleeping on a straw mattress in a room with 17 other people while rats run across your feet is because somewhere along the line people fought for labor laws, public health reforms, building codes, and basic human dignity. Their suffering wasn't noble or romantic, it was just suffering. But their persistence, their stubborn refusal to let impossible conditions completely destroy them, that was remarkable. They made it through one more night and then another until somehow winter ended and spring arrived and life continued. So rest easy tonight. You've earned it just by surviving the modern world, which has its own challenges even if they're not freezing to death in a tenement level. And maybe whisper a quiet thank you to all those nameless forgotten people who lived through winters that would break most of us, who kept going when giving up would have been easier, who survived long enough to have children, who survived long enough to eventually lead to you warm and safe and alive. Sleep, well, dream peacefully, and when you wake up tomorrow to central heating and breakfast that probably won't kill you, remember that you're living in the future that Victorian slum dwellers could only dream about. Welcome to the other side of history. Try not to take it for granted. Good night.